Picture the most beautiful building you've ever seen. Pale stone facade, 6 floors tall, columns rising from the street like the bones of some ancient temple. Enormous plate glass windows, each one taller than a house, glowing warm gold in the morning dark. Mannequins posed inside like frozen goddesses, draped in silk and fur and things that cost more than your father earns in a year. Now picture the entrance, the main entrance. Brass revolving doors polished to mirror brightness. A doorman in livery who looks like he belongs at Buckingham Palace. A carpet, actually red, running from the pavement to the threshold, because the pavement itself isn't good enough for the customer's feet. Flowers in vases. Real flowers. Changed daily. Now picture the other entrance, the one around the back, down a narrow alley that smells of wet brick and kitchen waste, where a painted wooden door hangs slightly crooked on its hinges, and a man who never learned your name waves you through with a curt nod. No carpet, no flowers. A staircase so poorly lit you have to feel the wall as you climb it, and the wall is always damp. This is where you come in. Every morning, 6 days a week. Rain or not. Sick or not. Feet bleeding inside your shoes or not. You come in through the back. We're going to London tonight. 1912. One of those department stores that's springing up across the city like cathedrals for a new religion. The religion of buying things. 5 floors of gloves and glassware and gowns. Perfume counters staffed by women who've learned to smile until their faces ache. Tea rooms on the 4th floor where ladies from Mayfair rest their feet between purchases, their feet. Because yours don't get to rest. Not ever, really. Not for as long as you're on that floor. We're not going as shoppers tonight. We're not going to glide between the counters, picking things up, putting them down, accepting the attentions of women who speak to us like we're honoured guests. We're going as one of those women. And I should be honest with you right now, before we begin, this is going to be uncomfortable, not in the way that a story about plague or warfare is uncomfortable, where the horror is enormous and therefore somehow distant. This is the other kind, the smaller kind that gets under your skin, the kind made of tiny humiliations, stacked one on top of another, day after day, year after year, until your feet have stopped hurting because they've stopped feeling anything at all. I make these sleep stories about history. Sometimes people listen while they fall asleep. Sometimes people are just oddly fascinated by how terrible things used to be. Probably both. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, half a second, maybe less, you have forgotten where you are. Then it comes back. The ceiling. Too close. The wooden boards above your head so near that if you sat up too fast you'd crack your skull on them. The faint grey rectangle of the window which faces a brick wall and collects no light worth mentioning. The sounds of breathing on all sides. 4 other women in this room with you, 2 of them sharing a bed because there isn't room for 5 separate beds, though the store very kindly provides you all with separate blankets. Separate blankets. That's something. The room is cold. Not biting cold, not the kind that kills, but the kind that sits on your skin when the blanket falls off in the night and by morning has worked its way into your joints. Your shoulders ache with it. Your knees, your feet. Actually, let's come back to your feet. Your name is Agnes Morrow. You're 17 years old, and you arrived in London 8 months ago from a village in Kent called Headcorn, which has 1 church, 2 pubs, a post office, and absolutely no future for a girl like you. You brought a brown cardboard suitcase, 3 dresses, your mother's advice to always look presentable, and a letter of introduction from the wife of the local doctor who knew someone at Hartley and Sons department store on Oxford Street. Hartley and Sons. That's where you are now, technically. Not in the shop itself. The shop doesn't open for another 3 hours. You're in the dormitory above the shop. The East Wing, 4th floor, room 6 of 14. 14 rooms of women sleeping 4 or 5 to a space. Above 6 floors of merchandise. In a building that the management likes to describe as the finest retail establishment in the capital. And you live inside it. That's the living-in system. Most of the girls at Hartley's live here. Bed and board deducted directly from your wages. 2 shillings and 6pence a week for the room, another 1 and 6 for meals. The meals are taken in the staff refectory in the basement, at designated times, in silence or near silence, because management has decided that the noise of 100 women talking to each other over supper is not conducive to proper decorum. You earn 9 shillings a week. That's your wage. 9 shillings a week to stand behind the ribbon and haberdashery counter on the 2nd floor of Hartley and Sons, to sell buttons and lace and elastic and wool, to smile at women who look through you like glass, to recite the prices without checking the tags, to wrap purchases with a particular folding technique that Miss Hartley, Mrs. Alfred Hartley, the senior supervisor, no relation to the store owners, demonstrated 4 times in your first week and expected you to have memorized by the start of the second. 9 shillings minus 4 shillings for board and lodging. That leaves 5. Out of that 5, you need soap, hairpins, the specific black stockings Hartley's requires. Not any black stockings. They're black stockings, purchased at a discount from the haberdashery department, which is a neat little trick the management has worked out. An occasional replacement of the white collar that's part of your uniform, and which must be spotless every single morning. Every morning. Actually white. You've started buying them 2 at a time because one is always soaking. The bell sounds at 6, not a gentle bell. Not the kind of sound you ease into. It's a hand bell, rung by whoever is on dormitory duty that morning. Walk through the corridors with what feels like deliberate enthusiasm for the task. Clang, clang, clang. The sound bounces off the low ceilings and finds its way into whatever corner of sleep you'd managed to crawl into. Around you, the other women begin to move. Maisie in the next bed, who's been here 3 years, and moves like she's done this 10,000 times, which she has, swings her legs out before the bell has even stopped and begins pinning her hair in the dark from pure muscle memory. Ruth, who shares the bed opposite with a girl called Constance, makes a sound that is not quite a word and not quite a groan, and pulls the blanket tighter for 1 defiant second before letting it go. You sit up. Cold air hits your shoulders. The kind of cold that finds the gap at your collar and slides down your spine like something unfriendly. You reach under the bed for your boots. They're cold too. The leather is stiff from overnight, and your fingers fumble with the laces in a way they won't once they've warmed up. But that takes time, and time is not something the morning at Hartley's has a surplus of. There is 1 wash basin in this room. 1. You have learned the unwritten order of things. Maisie first, because Maisie has been here longest, and nobody argued this point when it was established, and nobody argues it now. Then Ruth, then Constance, then Eleanor, who is 16 and sometimes still cries at night very quietly, and you pretend not to hear. Then you. The water in the jug is cold. Yesterday's water mostly. Someone is supposed to bring fresh water each morning, but that someone is a girl called Pauline from 2 rooms over who does it in exchange for a monthly payment of 3pence from each of them. and Pauline is not always reliable. This morning, Pauline was not reliable. You wash your face with cold water that has a faint metallic taste from the jug. Run your damp hands over your hair to smooth it, and stand very still while Maisie pins your collar in exchange for you doing the same for her. An arrangement born of necessity, because the back buttons on the uniform blouse have been placed at a height designed by someone who has never had to do them up alone. The uniform is black from collar to hem. Black blouse, black skirt that reaches your ankles, black apron on top that is starched so stiff it could hold its own shape without you in it. The apron is partly ceremonial, Maisie told you, because you won't be handling anything that would dirty it. But it signals that you are a member of staff rather than a customer, and the distinction must be immediately legible to anyone who enters the department. The collar is white, the cuffs are white. These must be immaculate. You put on the white collar. You have checked it 3 times already since washing it 2 days ago. It is white. It is starched. The left edge sits slightly higher than the right, and you adjust this with 2 hairpins concealed under the lapel, which is not technically regulation, but which Maisie showed you on day 4 and which Miss Hartley has either not noticed or chosen not to comment upon. Your boots are on now, laced. The left heel has developed a small bruise, not from the boot itself, but from the floor. 10 hours on wooden floorboards with no give, no cushioning, nothing between the sole of your foot and the hard world below. And in the morning the bruise wakes up before you do, announcing itself with a deep and specific throb that you've learned to acknowledge and move past. You are ready. It is 6:23 in the morning. The dormitory building connects to the main store via a covered walkway on the 3rd floor that smells of the previous century. That smell is old wood and something chemical, and the particular damp of enclosed spaces that nobody has aired out properly in a very long time. You cross it every morning and every evening, and it's become one of those transitional spaces that your brain has stopped registering as a location. It is simply the place between where you sleep and where you work, and both of those things swallow so much of your attention that the passage between them has become invisible. The staff staircase down to the 2nd floor has 17 steps. You know this because you counted them on your first day, and the number has stayed with you the way numbers attach themselves to new places when you're frightened and trying to impose order on things. At the bottom of the stairs the day begins. The 2nd floor of Hartley & Sons at 6:45 in the morning looks like a stage set before the audience arrives. The counters are still covered with their evening cloths, long pieces of pale canvas draped over everything to keep the dust off, so that every surface wears a kind of ghostly shroud. The display cases are dark. The overhead lights, electric all of them, which still strikes you as slightly miraculous, are on their lowest setting, giving everything a grey morning cast that makes it look like a drawing of the department rather than the department itself. There is an hour before opening, an hour in which the day's work begins anyway, because this is the invisible hour, the hour the customers will never see, the hour in which you turn the stage from last night into this morning, restore it to that perfect impossible standard that exists only in the moment before the doors open and actual human beings begin to disturb it. You take the cover off your counter, the ribbon counter, 12 feet of oaken glass in the northeast corner of the 2nd floor. Behind you, on the wall, shelves from waist height to just above your reach, every shelf divided into slots, every slot containing a bolt of ribbon in a different colour and width and material. 377 different ribbons at last count. You count them on Monday mornings when there's nothing else to do, the way some people count sheep. Velvet ribbons, satin ribbons, grosgrain and petersham and wire-edged ribbons in every shade the 1912 colour palette has managed to produce. Before you, on top of the counter, the display. A selection of the newest stock, a card announcing today's prices, and the small scissors on their chain that you use for cutting lengths, which you're responsible for not losing, and responsible for keeping sharp, and responsible for ensuring are placed precisely so on the glass surface, because Miss Hartley has views about the precise placement of scissors on glass surfaces. You begin the morning procedure. This means take down the stock from last night's undisplayable remnants and restore them to their proper shelf positions. Check that the price cards are correct. Dust the counter with the designated duster, which is kept in the designated drawer, which must be returned to the designated drawer after use. Straighten the display. Recut any ribbon ends that are frayed overnight. Check your stock against yesterday's ledger to ensure nothing has gone unrecorded. You do this every morning, 6 mornings a week. The smell of the second floor at this hour is a specific thing. During the day, when it's open, it smells of women, of powder and perfume, of wool coats come in from the street, of the particular warm human smell of 100 bodies in a closed space. A good smell, actually, or at least a complicated one. But now, empty, the floor settles back into its own smell. Varnish and dye. The faint chemical sharpness of the sizing in new fabric. The old wood smell of the shelves, and underneath all of it, if you pay attention, the cooking smell from the basement refectory beginning to wake up. Something bread adjacent that promises breakfast in 40 minutes if you're lucky. You are always hungry in the morning. You are, if you're honest, always hungry generally. 9 shillings minus 4 shillings, and 6pence is 4 shillings and 6pence, and 4 shillings and 6pence when 2 meals a day are provided by the store's refectory doesn't leave much room for supplementary food, and the refectory meals, while regular, are not what anyone would describe as generous. Porridge in the morning, soup and bread at midday, if midday falls within your designated lunch window. A hot meal in the evening that has been prepared in quantity and kept warm for varying lengths of time, and which arrives at the table tasting of the weight. You eat it anyway. You eat all of it. Miss Hartley appears at 7:15. She doesn't make an entrance. She simply materializes in the way that senior supervisors do, stepping out from between 2 covered counters as though she'd been standing there for some time, observing. Perhaps she had. Miss Hartley, and it's always Miss Hartley, never anything more familiar, is a woman of perhaps 50, though her face is the kind that refuses to commit to an age. She has grey hair pinned in a style that was modern about 15 years ago and has remained there by choice. Her uniform is identical to yours in construction, but somehow her black skirt falls differently. Her white collar sits with a precision that suggests it has been frightened into position. She carries a small notebook. Everything about Miss Hartley carries a form of contained energy, the sense of potential notation at all times. She walks the floor. This is the morning inspection, and if you've been here longer than 3 weeks, you know what it is and what it means. Miss Hartley moves from counter to counter in an order that is not random but not entirely predictable either. Checking displays, checking that the counter cloths have been properly folded and stored, occasionally running a finger along a shelf edge for dust. though what she does with the information her finger collects is unclear because she never remarks on it directly. She arrives at your counter. You stand straight. You have been standing straight since you heard her heels on the floor 2 stations away. Not from fear exactly, or not only from fear, but because this is what you do. Standing straight is one of the few things that cost you nothing and earns you nothing negative, and in the economy of Hartley's, anything that doesn't cost you something is worth doing. She examines the display. Her eyes move over the ribbon selection. She picks up the small scissors, tests the hinge, returns them to the glass surface, but perhaps half an inch further left than you placed them. Your stock ledger, Miss Morrow. You open the ledger. She reads it without picking it up, scanning down the columns with the fluency of someone who has read 1,000 such ledgers and can find the error in 10 seconds. She can. She finds the error in about 8. The number 4 grosgrain. You've recorded 17 yards remaining. Yes, Miss Hartley. There are 16.5. A pause that invites you to disagree or to explain or to demonstrate that you understand what is happening here. Half a yard unrecorded. The difference is not large, but the principle is. I'm sorry, Miss Hartley, I'll correct it. She moves on. She has not looked at your face once during this exchange. Her eyes were on the counter, on the ledger, on the space where the scissors now sit. You are, in this moment, an extension of the counter, a thing that speaks and holds the ledger. This is something you understand now, 8 months in, that you did not understand in Headcorn, where everyone knew who you were and what your father did, and how your grandmother had been born 2 villages over, and whether the youngest Morrow girl was clever or kind or worth talking to. Here you are Miss Morrow, ribbon counter, 2nd floor. And if the ribbon counter is correctly stocked and properly displayed and its ledger is accurate to the half yard, Miss Morrow is doing well. If not, she isn't. The doors open at 8 o'clock. Not your doors, the main entrance on Oxford Street. Your floor is open to customers from 8, though the first ones rarely arrive before 8:30, because the kind of woman who shops at Hartley's is not generally the kind of woman who rushes. She arrives after breakfast, after her children's lessons have been arranged, after whatever administrative life of a middle-class or upper-middle-class London household requires in the morning. But you are on the floor from 8, standing. This is worth dwelling on, because it's the thing that's hardest to convey. Standing. Not briefly, not with the option of sitting when the floor is quiet, not even leaning. The Shops Act of 1911, which was supposed to help, which everyone talked about for a while as though it had changed something, technically requires that seats be provided for shop assistants when not serving customers, and seats have been provided. One, at the end of the gloves counter, about 60 feet from where you stand, one that the floor supervisor must specifically authorize you to use, one that would require you to leave your position, walk to the end of the room, sit visibly in a chair like a person who has abandoned their duties, and then return. Nobody uses the chair. You stand. You have stood, with brief interruptions for meals and the short walk between your counter and the floor, for somewhere between 58 and 63 hours a week since you started. Your feet have gone through a transformation in those 8 months. The first month they hurt in a way that was personal and urgent, the way a toothache is personal, specific to you, seeming to demand your attention and sympathy. The second month, the hurt became more like weather, present and unignorable but impersonal. By the third month, something changed in the architecture of your feet. The shape of them is different now. The left foot, on which you unconsciously bear slightly more weight, has a slight swelling above the ankle that is there in the morning, and worse by evening. The skin on your heels has hardened in a way that is almost useful. The pain has migrated from the surface to something deeper, a grinding quality in the joint that Maisie says, with the authority of someone who has had it for years, is what happens to all of them eventually. Varicose veins, Maisie says, are the occupational hazard they don't tell you about at interview. She lifts her skirt hem to show you sometimes the dark branching lines that have appeared in her calves over 3 years of standing. Like a map of somewhere, she says. Like a map to somewhere I don't want to go. It's 8:45. The first customers of the morning appear on the second floor. A woman in a good wool coat with 2 daughters who look old enough to have opinions of their own and young enough to still be wearing their mother's choices. They move toward the gloves counter, and you watch their passage across the floor, not with interest exactly, but with the alert animal attention that your body has developed for movement in the space, the way a waiter tracks glasses, the way a nurse tracks faces. If they turn left instead of right at the case of leather handbags, they'll come to you. They turn right. You return your eyes to the middle distance. The counter, the middle distance, the counter. This is where your eyes go when there is nothing to do, which is most of the time. There is a discipline to standing behind a counter with nothing to attend to. It looks like patience, and it is partly patience, but it is also partly a form of mental withdrawal, a managed distance from the body in the room, an internal departure that leaves enough of you present to return quickly when required. You think about your mother's last letter. She wants to know if you like London. You've been writing back that it's very interesting, which is true, and that you're learning a great deal, which is also true, and that you're getting on well, which is the version of true that fits inside a letter. The actual version is more complicated. By 10 o'clock, the floor has woken up. The overhead lights are on full now, electric and generous, filling the room with a warmth that's almost convincing. From outside the counters, from the customer side, this floor probably looks exactly as it's supposed to look, a space of soft abundance. Rolls of fabric glowing in their glass cases, the smell of newness and good things. The first real customer comes to your counter at 10:10. She's perhaps 45, dressed well, but not extravagantly, accompanied by a young girl who may be her daughter or niece or ward. The girl looks about 12 and is conducting a rigorous examination of everything except the ribbons, apparently fascinated by the ceiling rose above the staircase. "Good morning," you say. "How may I assist you?" The phrasing is not yours. It is the phrasing Hartley's prescribes in a small printed card that was given to you during your first week, containing the acceptable forms of address and the acceptable responses to various customer queries, and the absolutely essential distinction between "can I help you?", which is too casual and implies uncertainty about your ability, and "how may I assist?", which is confident and servile in precisely the right proportions. "I need 3 yards of ribbon for a hat," the woman says. "Satin, not too wide, in a shade close to this." She opens her bag and produces a scrap of fabric, a piece of dusty blue grosgrain, and holds it toward you. You take it, hold it, carry it to the shelf. The light on the shelves is different from the light in a customer's home, and you've learned this matters. The electric brightness of the floor can make colours look richer or colder or slightly wrong, and you've learned to assess for this. to make the translation automatically. You take down 4 candidates. These are the closest to the shade, you say, unrolling a few inches of each to show the colour against the scrap. This one, the mid-blue satin, narrower, is very close in tone, though slightly cooler. This one is warmer but wider, if you want the width matched as well as the colour. That one, she says, pointing at the mid-blue, 3 yards, 3.5, I may need extra. You cut the ribbon. The scissors are good scissors, properly sharpened. You sharpen them Thursday evenings, and they go through the satin with a whisper. 3.5 yards measured against the brass ruler inlaid in the counter's edge. The cut must be clean and straight. Hartley's customers do not take home ribbons with crooked cuts. You fold the ribbon in the correct fold, which is a specific series of movements creating a flat parcel that can be slipped into a bag without wrinkling the satin. The tissue paper, the small printed card with the store's name and the price, the correct knot on the string, which is different from the knot your mother taught you, and which you practiced on your lunch break for an entire week until it looked right. 2 shillings and 4pence, you say. She pays with a half-crown. You make change from the small till at the end of the counter, count it back into her palm, and thank her. The girl who has finished examining the ceiling examines you instead. You're aware of her eyes, open and curious in the way children's eyes are before they learn not to look at service staff, as though you're something interestingly specific, a creature in its natural habitat. The woman takes her parcel and steers the girl away, and you return to the middle distance, 2 shillings and 4pence. In the course of a full trading day, you might handle 200 or 300 transactions like that. Transactions measured in shillings and pence. The calculations are fast, the movements are fast, the smiles are fast. You've gotten good at the service smile, which is different from an actual smile, and lives in your face as a sort of pleasant readiness, a signal of willingness without the investment of genuine emotion. Maisie taught you this too. She says there are only so many real smiles in a person, and you should save yours for people who've earned them. By 11, your feet have moved from the morning's manageable grinding into the sharper language of mid-morning. There is a particular point. It comes somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd hour of standing, when the pain in your feet stops being background and pushes into the foreground, asserting itself in a way that demands conscious management. You have techniques. You shift your weight left to right in increments small enough that they're not visible as fidgeting. You press the balls of your feet into the floor and release. You have learned the capacity to concentrate simultaneously on a customer's request and the small rhythmic negotiations between your body and the floor. These are not skills anyone told you you'd need to develop. They are skills Hartley's has extracted from you over 8 months without asking permission and without offering thanks. You're not unique in this. Look down the floor. There are 22 women on the 2nd floor during the morning shift, positioned behind their counters with their backs straight and their hands folded or occupied, and their faces carrying that particular expression of pleasant attention. From the customer's side, they look like something designed, like furniture that speaks. From where you stand behind the counter, you can see what the customers can't. The very small adjustments, the weight shifts, the brief closing of eyes that have nothing wrong with them, the 2 fingers of one hand pressing against the opposite palm in what looks like an idle gesture, but is actually someone counting seconds until the next break. Everyone has a count. Some people count to lunch, some count to closing. Some people count to specific imaginary markers, every 100 customers, every hour, every time a particular church bell rings from somewhere outside on the street, muffled by the plate glass. You count to lunch. Miss Hartley walks the floor twice before noon. The second time, she stops not at your counter, but at the counter diagonal from yours, the one staffed by a woman named Edith Baines. Edith is 24. She's been at Hartley's 4 years, which puts her somewhere in the unwritten hierarchy between the junior girls like you and the women approaching supervisor rank like Maisie. She is from Birmingham, which is information she volunteered in her third sentence upon meeting you, the way people from places that aren't London often do, establishing the fact of their origin as a form of credential. She has red hair that is aggressively contained under her cap, and a way of talking to difficult customers that is equal parts sweetness and granite. Edith sells fabric. The fabric counter is a larger operation than ribbons, more stock, higher values per transaction, customers who take longer, who want to feel every sample, who return over days and weeks before deciding. Edith knows her stock the way you know yours, but multiplied. The specific drape and weight of every piece in the case, the provenance, the appropriate applications, the care instructions, and the honest assessment of which care instructions are optimistic. She is, by any reasonable measure, excellent at her job. Miss Hartley stands at the edge of Edith's counter for perhaps 30 seconds. Edith is with a customer, a middle-aged woman who has been examining woolen fabric for the better part of 20 minutes. Miss Hartley watches, says nothing, and moves on. You don't know what she was looking for. You rarely know what Miss Hartley is looking for. This is one of the subtle, perpetual stresses of the floor, that the standard is being measured constantly. That measurement might be happening right now, that something you did or didn't do 2 minutes ago may have been noted in the small notebook, and you won't know until it's relevant, which might be today or might be months from now, a fact retrieved from the notebook at exactly the moment that feels least recoverable. At Hartley's, you're always being evaluated and never quite told by what criteria. The lunch break is at 1 o'clock. This is not negotiable. 1 o'clock, not 5 past. The floor is staffed in overlapping shifts during the lunch period. Some girls go at 1, some at 1:30, some wait until 2 if the floor is busy and there's no cover, and the system depends on each person appearing and disappearing at the correct time with the reliability of a tide. You go at 1. The staff staircase down to the basement has 21 steps, a different number from the dormitory stairs, which you still find slightly disorienting when you're tired. Your feet have memorized 1 count and arrive at the bottom expecting to stop and find 1 more step below them. The refectory is a low-ceilinged room the length of a cricket pitch, lit by windows at the top of the walls that look directly onto the pavement outside and through which, if the foot traffic is heavy, you get a parade of legs and shoes and the occasional bottom of an umbrella tip. Long tables, wooden benches, a counter at the far end where the food is served, and a woman named Mrs. Bridge who has presided over it for so long that nobody at Hartley's can remember a time before her. The soup today is barley and something vegetable. The bread is white and good. There is tea, which is hot and reliably strong, and this is not a small thing. In a world of variable comforts, hot strong tea available reliably twice a day is a genuine mercy. You sit down, sitting down. If you have never stood for 4 consecutive hours in tight shoes, you cannot know what sitting down feels like after it. It is not simply the absence of standing. It is a positive physical event, a relief that starts in your ankles and travels up your legs and arrives at your lower back with the quality of something that has been held under pressure releasing. The bench is hard. You don't care. The fact of horizontal support under your legs is extraordinary. You eat. Around you, the tables fill with women in black uniforms, each one arriving with the slightly altered face of someone who has just been given 20 minutes of privacy. Conversations start up, not loud ones. The refectory doesn't encourage loudness, but the particular relieved murmur of people who've been performing a constrained version of themselves all morning and are briefly allowed to be something looser. Ruth sits across from you. She works the hosiery counter and has the slightly hollow look that comes from a counter that requires constant bending to retrieve stock from the cases below, which means her back is managing something that yours isn't, which means her list of specific bodily complaints is different from yours, which is one of the things you've all learned to compare with a kind of dark humour, as though your bodies are collections of accumulated professional injuries and you are curators. Mrs. Cartwright came back, Ruth says. This is an ongoing situation. Mrs. Cartwright is a customer who has been returning to the hosiery counter 3 times a week for 6 weeks to examine stockings she has not yet purchased. She made me unpack the entire French silk display again, the entire thing. Did she buy anything? 3 pairs, after I'd packed it all back up. There's a pause in which both of you eat soup. That's something, you say. It's 3 pairs, Ruth says. The French silk. 3 pairs at 4 shillings each. Miss Hartley will be pleased. Miss Hartley will say the other pairs should have sold too, and what did I do wrong? This is also likely true. You eat bread. Maisie arrives late, which means there's been a customer situation on the floor above. Someone who needed more time than the shift handover accommodated. She sits down with the compact efficiency of someone who has 17 minutes left and knows exactly how to use them, fills her bowl and begins eating standing briefly because the bench is too full to squeeze in. Someone shifts. She sits. Edith's been fined, Maisie says. She says it the way you'd say it started raining, a fact assessed and accepted. What for, you ask? Price discrepancy. A customer says she was told 3 shillings a yard for the grey wool last Tuesday. The ledger says 3 and 6. Was the ledger wrong? Maisie gives you a look. Ledger's never wrong. Did Edith? Edith says she quoted 3 shillings. Customer says 3 shillings. A pause. Miss Hartley says the ledger says 3 and 6 and someone is mistaken. You know what this means. A fine for Edith. The specific amount varies but could be anything from a few pence to an entire shilling, and a shilling from Edith's wage of 11 shillings a week. Edith, with her 4 years of experience, earns more than you, is not nothing. It is a week of soap and hairpins. It is the difference between a letter home with a postal order enclosed and a letter home without one. You eat your soup. The system of fines at Hartley's is a precise and well-developed instrument. Late for the shift, 6pence. Incorrect change given, 6pence to a shilling, depending on the amount. A soiled or improperly starched collar, 3pence. Speaking to a customer in a manner adjudged insufficiently polite, 6pence. Price discrepancy. Variable, at Miss Hartley's discretion. Damage to stock. Replacement value, potentially. Though this is mercifully rare because you've all learned to move around merchandise the way surgeons move around patients. The fines are legal. They are technically permitted. The 1906 Truck Act is supposed to govern this sort of thing, but the way Hartley's has structured the deductions, framed as corrections recorded in the wages ledger as adjustments, has so far survived whatever scrutiny the relevant authorities have been able to give it, which is not very much because the relevant authorities have quite a lot to scrutinise and very little staff for doing so. Maisie knows this. She knows which fights are worth having and which ones aren't. You're learning. 14 minutes, you eat the rest of your soup, drink your tea standing up because there's no more time to sit, and go back up the 21 steps to the floor. The afternoon is different from the morning in texture, if not in structure. The mornings have a particular quality of newness. The stock is undisturbed, the displays are perfect. You are 4 or 5 hours away from the worst of the standing pain, and the customers who come in the morning are generally decisive. They know what they want. They buy it. The afternoon brings a different kind of customer. The women who are shopping as an activity rather than a mission, who want to look at everything before deciding on anything, or who won't decide today, or who have decided but want to confirm the decision by having a shopgirl explain it back to them several times in slightly different words. These are not bad customers. They are in many ways exactly the kind of customers a department store is designed for. Customers who will spend time and accumulate purchases and leave with more than they came in for. But they require a different mode of engagement, something closer to collaboration than service, and by mid-afternoon, when your feet are deep into their second and more serious phase of protest, the collaboration is something you have to build consciously, reaching for it the way you reach for anything effortful. You become, in the afternoon, something closer to a performer. This is not a metaphor Hartley's would use. Hartley's would say you are providing attentive and expert assistance. But from the inside, it feels like performance, the self you bring to the counter at 2 in the afternoon, warm and knowledgeable and pleased to show you one more sample, is a constructed thing, built from the available materials of your actual exhausted self, and shaped by the requirements of the position. You wonder sometimes if this is what acting is. Then you wonder if the women at the counters who are genuinely pleasant, genuinely engaged, are better people than you or simply better actors, and you decide you're too tired to work out the difference. At 3 o'clock, something happens. It doesn't announce itself as significant. Most things don't. It begins as a raised voice, which on the second floor of Hartley's is already unusual enough to register, the way a wrong note registers in a familiar piece of music. The raised voice belongs to a woman at the fabric counter, not Edith's voice, a customer's voice. You can hear it from your station, but not clearly. The acoustics of the floor diffuse sound horizontally, so what reaches you is the tone rather than the words. The tone is accusatory. The tone has weight and certainty behind it. The particular register of someone who has decided something and is announcing the decision rather than arguing for it. You see, from the corner of your eye, the customer, a woman in a very good dark green coat, maybe 50, with a kind of face that has spent a lifetime being agreed with, standing at Edith's counter with one hand pressed flat on the glass surface, her posture forward, leaning. The posture of someone who is not presenting a question but delivering a verdict. Edith's posture is very still, very controlled. The specific stillness of someone who is absorbing something difficult without allowing it to pass through into expression. You return your eyes to your own counter. Your customer, a young woman looking at narrow velvet ribbons for a child's dress, is explaining the difference between navy and midnight blue, which she understands are different but wants confirmed, and you confirm it and show her both, and let her take them to the window for better light, which is what you do when customers want to see colours more accurately. From the fabric counter, the raised voice continues. Your customer decides on the midnight blue. You cut 2 yards, make the fold, count the change. The raised voice has stopped. You look up. Miss Hartley is at the fabric counter. She is standing with the posture she uses when she's addressing a situation, a posture that is slightly different from her inspection posture, more direct, more present. The green-coated customer is speaking to her. Edith is standing 4 feet back from her counter, with her hands folded, which is not her normal position. Her normal position is behind the counter. 4 feet back from it is the position of someone who's been asked to step away. You watch this for 2 seconds and then look away. It is not your business. Everything at Hartley's that isn't your counter is, by unspoken agreement, not your business, and making it your business is one of the things that leads to difficult conversations with Miss Hartley in the glass-windowed office at the back of the floor. But you hear what the green-coated customer says next, because she says it at a volume she's perhaps forgotten is unnecessary. She says Edith put something in her pocket. The words come through clearly enough, the vowels of someone who has never had to economize on consonants, the vowels of Mayfair or somewhere similar. Edith. Pocket. Take. Your hands keep moving. Stock in the counter, the small tidying motions of someone between customers. You do not look at Edith. You are aware that every woman on the second floor is doing exactly what you are doing, which is not looking at Edith while simultaneously monitoring everything that is happening at the fabric counter with a peripheral attention so precise it would startle you if you stopped to think about it. This is a survival skill at Hartley's, maybe anywhere. You learn to watch without watching, to be alert without the alertness being visible. What follows takes about 12 minutes and covers, in those 12 minutes, a territory that is very small geographically. 2 counters, 1 office doorway, but enormous in terms of what it means. Miss Hartley says something to Edith in a low voice. Edith shakes her head. You can see the small, decisive movement from where you stand. The green-coated customer says something further, and you catch the word manager and the word certainly. Mr. Pierce, who is the floor manager, a man, always a man, the floor managers are always men, appears from the direction of the back office with the self-important unhaste of someone who has been summoned and intends to manage the situation from a position of composed authority. He speaks to the customer. He speaks to Miss Hartley. He speaks to Edith. The conversation is quiet. You cannot hear it. You're selling a yard of silver ribbon to a woman who wants it for curtain tie-backs, and you are explaining why the width she has chosen is appropriate for that purpose, and you are smiling the service smile with its warmth and readiness, while watching, in your peripheral vision, Edith's face. Edith's face does not change. That is the thing. That is the thing that stays with you after, the specific courage or specific discipline of it. Edith's face does not change through any of this. She is being accused of theft in her place of work in front of a floor full of colleagues, and she keeps her face the same, still, controlled. The exact face you've been trained to present to customers, the face of pleasant capability, and she is holding it while something bad is being done to her. Mr. Pierce says something that includes the word office and makes a small gesture toward the back of the floor. Edith walks. She walks past your counter, 4 feet away. You do not look directly at her, but you see in the half-second she passes through your peripheral field that her hands are no longer folded. They are pressed flat against her sides. She is pressing her palms against her thighs through the black skirt. And you know, because you have done this yourself in bad moments, that this is what you do when your hands are shaking and you don't want anyone to see them shake. They are in the office for 20 minutes. The green-coated customer remains at the fabric counter throughout, her posture having shifted from accusatory to something more like patient entitlement, the posture of someone who expects the situation to be resolved in their favour and is simply waiting for the administrative process to catch up with that expectation. A junior girl named Clara serves her while Edith is gone, and she ends up buying 4 yards of something, which is almost funny. Almost. At 20 minutes past 3, Mr. Pierce comes back through the door alone. He says something brief to Miss Hartley, who nods once. He returns to his office. The green-coated customer leaves with her 4 yards of fabric and the satisfied deportment of someone who has had a productive afternoon. Edith does not come back to the floor. Maisie at her counter is very still. She has a customer examining handkerchiefs, and she's going through the appropriate motions, but her stillness is different from its morning quality. It is the stillness of someone who is absorbing information and placing it somewhere inside themselves where they can look at it later. At 4 o'clock, during a brief quiet spell, Eleanor from the lace counter comes close to your position and says very quietly, without looking at you the way you'd speak at a library, "They're letting her go." You say nothing. "She didn't take anything," Eleanor says. Her voice is very careful, very flat. She's 16 and she's been at Hartley's for 4 months less than you. "Eleanor," you say quietly, "she didn't." "Go back to your counter," she goes. At 4:30, Edith comes through the floor for the last time. She's carrying the small bag that was kept in the dormitory room she shares with 3 other women on the floor above. The bag contains whatever she had with her this morning. She's wearing her coat over her uniform because she has not apparently been given time to change. She walks from the back of the floor to the staff staircase. She does not look at anyone. Not because she can't. You understand this precisely, because you understand what it costs to look at people in a moment like this, when looking at someone means giving them access to your face, and your face is the last thing in the room you have any ownership of, and you cannot afford to give it away. She passes your counter, and you do something you have been trained not to do on the floor, something that has no practical value and serves no purpose and could, if Miss Hartley were looking, be noted in the small notebook. You say her name, not loud, just loud enough. "Edith." She stops, half a second, doesn't look at you. "I know," you say. 2 words, the smallest acknowledgement that a thing has happened and been witnessed, and that you know the difference between what the green-coated customer said and what is true. Edith's hands press against her sides for a moment, then she goes. You return your eyes to the middle distance. Miss Hartley is at the other end of the floor, not looking at you. Or possibly looking at you. You can't always tell. The floor closes at 6. 6 o'clock, and the great brass doors at the main entrance are locked from the inside, and the customers already in the store are gradually guided toward the exit with the polite persistence of a tide, and the floor empties the way a glass empties, suddenly and completely. The cloths come out, the covers go on the displays, the ledger is closed, checked, balanced. The scissors are placed on the glass counter exactly where they belong. The day's takings from your counter are counted into the till and locked, and the till key goes to Miss Hartley, and Miss Hartley goes to the office. You stand for another 12 minutes finishing the closing procedure. Your feet at this point have moved past the second phase of pain and into the third, which is the least painful in a way that is almost more alarming, because the third phase is the one where the pain becomes general and loses its specificity and starts to feel like weather, like something ambient. like a condition of the world rather than a condition of your body. By 7, you're upstairs. By 7:15, you're out of your uniform and sitting on the edge of your bed in the dormitory with your boots off, and the feeling of your weight no longer being on your feet is physical enough to be nearly audible, a private internal sound like a long breath let out. Eleanor is crying again. She's better at it than when she started. Quieter, more efficient. But in the small room the sound is unmistakable. You think about saying something. You think about what Maisie would say, which is probably something practical, something that provides a framework rather than comfort, because Maisie's affections run toward the useful. You say, "Put your feet up against the wall." Eleanor looks at you. Against the wall. It helps the swelling. She does it. After a moment you do it too. Both of you lying on your backs with your legs vertical against the dormitory wall, which is probably not what the dormitory wall was designed for, but which works. The blood running back down from your ankles in a way that helps. "Is it always like today?" Eleanor asks. "No," you say. "Sometimes it's different." A pause. "Sometimes it's worse." Eleanor makes a small sound that might be either a laugh or a further onset of crying. "Edith," she says, "yes. It wasn't, I know." A long pause. "What happens to her now?" Eleanor asks. You think about this. In London in 1912, what happens to a 24-year-old woman who's been dismissed from her position with, most likely, no character reference? Because a dismissal for theft, even an unproven one, even an invented one, even one that everyone on the floor knows is an invention, makes a character reference impossible to write and impossible to receive creditably. She'll find something, you say. It is not a lie. She probably will find something. London is enormous, and the opportunities for women's labour, while not generous, are various. She might find another shop. She might find a factory. She might go home to Birmingham. But the thing she was building at Hartley's, 4 years of knowledge, 4 years of accumulated expertise, the path towards something better, toward floor supervisor, toward something with a name that isn't counter-assistant, that is gone. Specifically and permanently gone. And what replaced it is a story that she didn't do anything to earn and can't easily disprove, and will follow her in the small world of London retail, with the faithful adhesion of something that knows it has been unfairly attached. She'll find something, you say again. You both lie there with your feet against the wall. Outside, through the narrow window, London is continuing. Supper is at 7:30. Down the 21 steps to the refectory, which smells of the evening meal from the moment you open the door at the top of the stairs. Something with cabbage tonight, the warm vegetable smell that fills the stairwell and tells you before you arrive what you'll be eating. Boiled beef with potatoes and cabbage. The beef is grey and the potatoes are soft past the point of having a texture, and the cabbage is the colour of something that surrendered long ago. But it is hot, and it is more than you had at lunch, and you eat all of it. Maisie eats quickly and efficiently, the way she does most things, and leaves before you've finished. She has a task this evening. She's on dormitory duty, which means walking the corridors at 9, ringing the bell that isn't as aggressive as the morning bell, but is still, at 9 o'clock, a statement of institutional intent. Ruth eats with the deliberate pleasure of someone who has decided that the meal is good enough to be enjoyed and has committed to this decision. Ruth has a practical happiness that you have come to find genuinely comforting. Not because it isn't sometimes a performance. It is, sometimes. You can see the effort behind it. But because the performance is one she seems to extend to herself as much as to the people around her, and there is something admirable in the consistency of it. "Are you going to the meeting on Thursday?" Ruth asks. "The meeting on Thursday." This requires some explanation. In the autumn of 1912, something is happening in London that is easy to overlook from inside a department store, and difficult to overlook from outside one. The Women's Social and Political Union, which has been around since 1903, has spent the last several years escalating. In March, their members smashed windows on Oxford Street. In June, Emily Wilding Davison. You've been asked at supper several times about Emily Wilding Davison, because someone always wants to talk about her. Stepped in front of the King's horse at the Derby and died from it. This is, depending on who you ask, either heroism or madness, or something more complicated than either word covers. On Thursday evening, in a church hall 2 streets from here, there is a meeting. The organisers are women who work in the shops along Oxford Street. Not the WSPU, not the militant wing, though some of them are members, but an affiliated group that's been talking about working conditions specifically, about the living-in system, about the standing, about the fines, about what happened to Edith this afternoon, though Thursday's meeting was arranged before today, so perhaps not about Edith specifically, though about the dozen Ediths who preceded her and the dozen who will come after. "I might," you say. Maisie says not to be seen going. Ruth says, "Maisie says a lot of things." Maisie's right about most of them. This is also true. Maisie's caution about the meeting is not cowardice. It is the same calculation that governs most of what Maisie does. A precise assessment of risk versus benefit, applied to a situation in which the risk is real and immediate. Dismissal, loss of lodging, loss of the reference that makes the next position possible. And the benefit is more distributed, more diffuse. The kind of benefit that accrues over time to people who may or may not include you. There are 140 women at Hartley's, you say. There are 4 Miss Hartleys and 1 Mr. Pierce. If everyone... Not everyone will, Ruth says, not argumentatively, just as a fact. No, you agree. You sit with this for a while. "I'll think about it," you say. After supper, there is theoretically free time, from 8:30, when supper ends, to 9, when the evening bell rings, is 30 minutes that belong to no one but you. In practice, this time is used for the small maintenance tasks that keep life in the dormitory habitable. Laundry, collar soaking, hair washing, on the days when the washroom isn't crowded, letter writing, the occasional mending. There is a small sitting room on the dormitory floor where women sometimes gather in the evenings, 3 chairs and a settee and a lamp that gives reasonable light for reading, and where conversations happen that are different from the refectory conversations, because the supervising gaze is slightly less present. Tonight you are in the sitting room with Ruth and Eleanor and a girl named Frances from the perfume counter on the 1st floor, who you don't know well but who sits in the corner most evenings reading a small blue book with the focused expression of someone studying for an examination, though you've never asked what. You're writing a letter to your mother. The letter is going well in the sense that it has words in it. The words are the usual ones. The store is busy. The weather is London weather. You're in good health. You hope they are too. Father's leg is, you hope, improving. You write around the edges of things. The letter your mother receives is a version of your life in which the main features are present, but the texture is missing. the way a map is accurate without conveying anything about whether it's hard or easy to walk the terrain. Tonight, you're finding it difficult to write around the edges of Edith. You keep starting sentences and stopping them. You think about the sound of Edith's hands pressing flat against her sides as she walked past your counter. You think about the green-coated customer and her certainty. The way certainty that rests on money and position feels different from certainty that rests on being right. How you can tell the difference between them after 8 months in a department store, because you've seen both kinds so many times that they've become distinguishable as weather systems. You write, "Today was difficult, but I am well." Then you put the pen down. The bell rings at 9. You go to bed. The dormitory room closes down around you, the sounds contracting from the building's ambient noise, the kitchen somewhere below finishing its work, the distant street, the particular creak of the building settling at night as though it spends the day holding itself still and only relaxes when the customers have gone, to the intimate sounds of 5 women in a small room, Maisie's efficient movement, Ruth's particular way of resettling in the bed several times before she's satisfied with the angle of the pillow, Eleanor's silence, which is a different quality from sleeping silence. It has the specific texture of someone awake and thinking. Constance is already asleep. Constance can sleep anywhere, in any circumstance, which is a gift that the rest of them eye with something close to jealousy. The ability to put down the day and go somewhere else, simply go completely without negotiating, seems like a freedom that is more profound than it sounds. You lie in the dark. Your feet have graduated now from the evening's second phase into the overnight phase, which is the long, slow process of decompression, the body unwinding itself from 10 hours of counterwork, the ligaments and muscles doing whatever it is they do in the hours between standing and standing again. The left ankle's particular swelling will be somewhat improved by morning. The bruise on the left heel will be somewhat improved. The calluses will be exactly what they are, unchanged. Tomorrow you will stand for 10 hours again, and then again, and then again, and then it will be Sunday, which is the shop's half day, and you will have the afternoon for whatever an afternoon in London means to you, which is usually the laundry and the collar soaking, and the walk to the park if it's not raining, the particular freedom of moving through a street without a counter between you and the world, your hands empty, your face arranged in no particular expression, no smile required. But that's Sunday. This is Friday. There's tomorrow first. You think about the meeting on Thursday. You think about it more directly than you've been allowing yourself to think about it, which has been a kind of peripheral thinking circling. In 1912, the question of whether to attend a meeting about working conditions at a department store is not a neutral question. It is a question with implications. Miss Hartley has not explicitly prohibited attendance at such meetings, because explicitly prohibiting attendance would require acknowledging that the meetings exist and that the conditions they're addressing are conditions, rather than simply the way things are. What she has done, in a conversation you heard second-hand from a woman who heard it from another woman who was there, is describe certain associations as not conducive to the professional standing of Hartley's staff, which is a phrase that means exactly what it sounds like. It means without naming what it means. The women who attend these meetings on Oxford Street are not, for the most part, the women who chain themselves to railings. They're shopgirls and seamstresses and women who work in the post office and the telephone exchange. They are women who go to work in the morning and come home in the evening and eat supper in refectories and sleep in dormitories and want in the medium term something better than what they currently have. Shorter hours, an end to the fine system, the ability to sit down when the floor is empty without it being recorded in a small notebook as a dereliction. They are, in their own way, as radical as anyone who has ever thrown a rock through a window. They're asking for the right to sit down. You think about Edith. You think about Edith walking past your counter with her hands pressed against her sides. You think about the green-coated customer and her certainty and what underpinned it. And you think about the 30 minutes between 9 and 9:30 on Thursday evening, which would require leaving the dormitory with a plausible destination and walking 2 streets and sitting in a church hall and listening, and then walking back and returning to the dormitory before the 10 o'clock bell, which is the latest the building's doors are supposed to be open. Possible. Not safe exactly, in the sense that nothing here is safe. Your position is not safe. Your reference is not safe. Your livelihood is not safe, and hasn't been since you arrived. But possible. You decide, lying in the dark with your feet aching in their quieter, overnight way, that you will go. Sleep takes longer to come than it used to. In your first weeks at Hartley's, you were tired enough that sleep was instantaneous, a fall rather than a descent, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't negotiate. Now your body is accustomed to the work, which means the tiredness is denser and more intimate, less overwhelming but more constant, like carrying something that's gotten lighter as your arms have gotten stronger. You can manage it better, but it's still always there. The room settles. Eleanor's breathing has slowed into the rhythm of actual sleep, which is a relief. The not sleeping sound is harder to lie near than the sleeping one. Outside, through the window that looks out at nothing useful, London continues its nighttime arrangements. In 1912, the city sleeps in layers. The wealthy parts are quiet by midnight. The working parts, the docks, the bakeries, the newspaper printing houses on Fleet Street, the all-night coffee stalls, never entirely stop. The streets you walked past every evening coming back to Hartley's from errands or the refectory. Oxford Street after dark is a different animal from Oxford Street at noon. The daytime glitter replaced by something more provisional. The gas lamps picking out only what's directly under them and leaving the rest to the dark. You've been in this city for 8 months. You know how to navigate Oxford Street and the streets directly north and south of it. You know the bus routes that could get you to the parks on Sundays. Hyde Park, which is enormous and free and bewilderingly full of people demonstrating things or listening to people demonstrate things from boxes, which you still find slightly startling. You know the post office at the end of the street and the chemist on the corner and the tea shop where you spent your first week's remaining money eating a piece of cake as an act of defiant self-celebration. You know much less than you think you know, and much more than you knew when you arrived. The girl who stepped off the train from Kent in February, with her cardboard case and her mother's advice, you can still find her in yourself sometimes, when something new happens and the 8 months of acclimatization haven't quite prepared you for it. She was frightened, that girl. She was very convincingly frightened without showing it, which might be the first useful thing this city taught her, that there's a difference between being frightened and being seen to be frightened, and that the second is optional even when the first isn't. You think about what you know about Edith's situation. 24 years old, 4 years at Hartley's, no family in London that you know of. She's mentioned Birmingham, mentioned a mother, never mentioned anyone closer. A reference that will be, at best, complicated to explain, at worst, damaging. the retail work she knows well, but retail is a city of closed gates once a word has been circulated. The store managers talk to each other. The position you work your way toward, supervisor, buyer, something with authority, requires the recommendation of the manager you're leaving, and what Edith's leaving looks like is not a recommendation. She has skills. She knows fabric, actually knows it, the way you're beginning to know ribbon. The feel, the drape, the provenance, the appropriate price, and the inappropriate one. That knowledge is real and valuable, but the venues where it's valuable overlap heavily with the venues where word of mouth about a dismissal would travel. Perhaps she goes to a smaller shop, a shop outside the district, a dressmaker's, where the skills transfer and the Hartley's network is less relevant. Perhaps she goes home to Birmingham, where her mother is, where the 4 years in London can be described on her own terms, where being the girl who worked at Hartley's in London for 4 years is a kind of credential rather than a complicated history. Perhaps she's already decided. She walked out of here this afternoon with a bag and a contained face, and a plan she'd formed between the office and the door, because a woman who can negotiate a fabric transaction in 3 languages, she can, you've heard her, is not without resources. You find yourself hoping this, not fiercely, not with the certainty of a prayer, just quietly, in the way you hope things for people you can't help. The sounds of the building are very specific at this hour. The kitchen is quiet now. The last clean-up was done by 10, and now the enormous basement room where 300 breakfasts and lunches and suppers are produced daily is dark and still. The pipes make sounds that the pipes always make. The building itself, 6 floors of Victorian confidence, brick and steel and plate glass and the particular architecture of commercial aspiration, breathes in whatever way buildings breathe, adjusting its temperature against the October night. Somewhere below you, the merchandise is waiting. 377 ribbons in their slots, the fabric in its cases, the gloves on their forms, the perfume in its bottles, the silk in the bridal department on the 3rd floor, the bridal department that you've been in twice and which smells of something between a garden and a sacristy, something composed specifically to make people believe that the fabric they're looking at is connected to permanence, all of it waiting for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, all of it requiring 12-hour days from the women who sell it. You think about what you know of the world outside your counter. In 1912, Europe is stable in the way that a glass is stable when it has been placed very carefully at the edge of a table. The newspapers in the refectory, where 3 papers are taken and left out for staff during meals, are full of things that register at the edge of your attention. The Balkans, naval expansion, the diplomatic language that has a particular quality you've learned to recognize, even though you're not sure what to do with it. The language of nations describing themselves as reasonable while describing each other as provocative. The Titanic went down in April. This was before you were very aware of the newspapers, and you learned about it the way you learned about most things that spring, through conversations in the refectory, through the girls who had friends in service, who had cousins who knew people who knew people. The Titanic, the ship that Hartley's had a connection to, in a roundabout way, through some commercial relationship you didn't fully understand, but which meant that for a week in April, the store had a hushed quality, the way large institutions do when they're calculating whether a catastrophe is personally relevant. First class had a 76% survival rate. Third class had a 25% survival rate. Someone read this out at the refectory table from the newspaper, and there was a silence that lasted about 10 seconds, and then someone said something practical about the soup and the conversation moved on. The survival rate for third class on the Titanic was 25%. The mathematics of class in 1912. You are not on the Titanic. You're in a dormitory room above the department store on Oxford Street. Your class is different from third class on a sinking ship, though the gap is narrower than the brass revolving door of the main entrance would suggest. But you are here. You're in London in 1912, which is, even from your specific vantage point, even with the feet and the fines and the white collars and the Ediths of it, still London, still 1912, still a city that is building itself towards something, though nobody quite knows what. The suffragettes are breaking windows on this street. 2 Saturdays ago you walked past a storefront 2 blocks from Hartley's with its window boarded up, and a woman next to you on the pavement said, "Serves them right." And another woman said very quietly, "Does it?" and walked on, and nobody punched anyone, and this small exchange stayed with you because of the courage contained in the "does it," which is so small a challenge and yet so clearly one, delivered into the air of a street in a city where women are currently being imprisoned and force-fed for the act of holding a different opinion. Does it? 2 words. You think about Thursday's meeting. You will go. Sleep is closer now. It comes toward you the way it does when you've stopped trying to arrange it. A gradual softening at the edges of thought, the loosening of the particular grip that the day maintains on your attention. Edith. Miss Hartley's notebook. The Grosgrain count 16.5 yards, not 17. The customer with the dusty blue scrap. The silver ribbon for curtain tiebacks. These are the beads on the string of the day, and sleep is the moment when you put the string down. Tomorrow there will be more beads, different, but made of the same material, the same glass, the same weight, the counter, the scissors, the morning inspection, the 30-minute lunch and the hard bench that is the most welcome thing in the world by 1 o'clock, the service smile and the middle distance and the weight of 10 hours in the feet, and something else, something that is yours rather than the store's. The Thursday meeting, the decision made in the dark, the small deliberate assertion of the self that exists outside the uniform. But that's Thursday. This is Friday. You let the day go. The sounds of the city are very distant now. London in October. October and a city this size generates its own warmth, you've noticed. Even on cold nights, the air above the buildings has a quality of stored heat, the day's activity releasing itself slowly into the dark. 500,000 people sleeping, or not sleeping, or working, or standing at their own versions of your counter in different buildings and different capacities. The woman in the green coat is somewhere in Mayfair or Kensington or wherever she lives, in a house you will never enter through the front door. Perhaps she's asleep. Perhaps she's at dinner, at one of those dinner parties that go on past midnight in certain parts of London in 1912, where they do not discuss the war that is coming because they don't know it's coming, or don't yet believe it is, or the women being force-fed in Holloway Prison, because this is not a dinner party topic in certain parts of London in 1912, where they discuss the season and the latest novel and the country house party that so-and-so gave in September. She is not thinking about Edith. She has already not thought about Edith. The event of the afternoon has categorized itself in her memory as a successful resolution of an unpleasant situation, which is what it is from where she stands. The fabric is in her bag. The shopgirl was removed. The natural order of things has been demonstrated. You are aware that this is one version of today. You are also aware that from this version you are invisible, or not even invisible, because invisible implies that you exist in the same plane and can't be seen. You are outside the plane, beyond the edges, the shop girl on the second floor of Hartley's who said 2 words to another shop girl and went to bed. And yet here you are, in the dark, thinking, present. The history that gets recorded is about the green-coated customers, about the brass doors and the mannequins in the windows and the great stores as monuments to commerce, the revolution in retail, the department store as the cathedral of a new century. The history that doesn't get recorded is this room. 5 women in a room with 1 basin. Feet that hurt in the specific way that 10 hours of standing on wood makes feet hurt. The blue collar soaking in the basin. The careful calculation of 4 shillings and 6pence against 9 shillings and what's left over. The Thursday meetings, the Edith of it. You are almost asleep. Your body has settled into the straw mattress in the way it does when the evening's accumulated tension has finished its release. That process takes about an hour, most nights, the body working out the day the way water works out of something saturated gradually by degrees. Now you are in the last stage, the warm and weightless stage, where the ceiling above you has stopped being a ceiling and started being whatever the ceiling becomes in the moment before it disappears. The church bell somewhere rings 10 o'clock. 5 hours until the morning bell. 5 hours in which your feet will continue their overnight repair work. Your shoulders will unknot. Your hands will uncurl from the particular grip that holding scissors and measuring ribbon all day develops in the muscles. 5 hours in which you will not be Miss Morrow of the ribbon counter, 2nd floor, but simply Agnes, who came from Headcorn with a cardboard suitcase and learned, in 8 months, more about the world than she expected to, and less than she needed, and some things she had rather not have known. You are warm enough, you are fed enough, you are safe enough, which is the complicated enough, the one that comes with the asterisk, safe enough in the sense that the roof is solid and the dormitory is dry and nothing is happening to you right now, tonight, in this specific moment. That's something. It is not nothing. The sounds are very quiet now. Just the building, just the distant city, just the 5 slow breathings in the room, each one with its slightly different rhythm, Constance's deep and even sleep, Ruth's small wrestlings, Eleanor's just settled quiet. You close your eyes properly. The last thing you see, behind your eyelids, is the 2nd floor of Hartley & Sons at 7 o'clock in the morning. The cloths coming off the counters, the grey pre-opening light, the stage being set, the 377 ribbons in their slots, the scissors on the glass, the brass ruler in the counter's edge, the particular fold of tissue paper around a length of satin that will hold its shape until someone's hands undo it somewhere in the city. These are the things you know, not the things that get written about, not the brass doors or the electric lights or the revolutionary experience of the modern department store. The fold, the scissors, the count, the morning's cold water and the evening's hot tea, and the 12 minutes at the end of the day finishing the closing procedure on a floor that used to be a stage and is now just a room, the ribbon counter, 2nd floor, and Agnes Morrow inside it, still here, still counting. The next morning starts the same way they all do, the bell at 6, the same cold. The same ceiling close above your face, the same grey non-window looking at the same brick wall. The brick is dark today. Rain then. You know this before you get up. 8. Months of London mornings have built a small private meteorology inside you, a set of readings taken from ceiling colour and air temperature, and the specific sound of the street below, which is different when wet, the wheels of the early carts leaving a different noise on wet cobblestone, something between a slap and a hiss that dry stone doesn't make. Maisie is already sitting up. Her hair goes up in the dark like she's assembling something she built herself and knows the order of every piece. "Ruth?" you say. "Awake," says Ruth from the other bed, not moving. "Eleanor?" A sound from the far corner. You've learned Eleanor's sounds. That one means awake and functioning, but choosing not to confirm it verbally yet. Constance is already standing at the basin. You sit on the edge of the bed and reach for your boots. The left boot has a stiffness this morning that is more pronounced than yesterday's. Not the leather. The leather has broken in as much as it's going to break in. The stiffness is in your ankle, which spent the night processing yesterday's 10 hours, and has formed an opinion about this that it expresses through the medium of resistance at the first pressure of lace tightening. You tighten it anyway. Saturday is different from Friday in one specific way that matters enormously. Saturday is the busiest day, and Saturday is the day the store stays open until 7 instead of 6, which means 1 extra hour of standing, 1 extra hour of the service smile, 1 extra hour of measuring and cutting and wrapping and counting. Change back into palms. And because Saturday brings a different kind of customer than the weekday, women who work during the week, younger women, women who have saved specifically for this, it is also the day that requires the most sustained performance. The floor is full by 9 o'clock. Not the weekday fill-in, where the population builds gradually, leaving spaces between customers where you can rest your face in its neutral position and take a breath. This is immediate and continuous, the Saturday filling. You have 3 customers before the morning inspection. The first, a woman wanting navy ribbon, wide, for trimming a child's coat. She has decided before she arrives at the counter, knows exactly what she wants, and the transaction is crisp and satisfying. 2 yards, correct fold, correct change, done in under 2 minutes. She thanks you with a genuine warmth that briefly makes the service smile feel less constructed. The second, a woman who wants green ribbon, cannot decide between the dark green and the sage green, asks you to hold each against the piece of wool she's brought with her, which is not green but rather a grey-green that sits equidistantly between both options, decides on the dark green. Then asks if she might see the sage green again, takes both to the window, returns with both, and after 8 minutes of comparison selects the dark green, which was the first one she looked at. You have performed this transaction perhaps 200 times in varying forms. The second customer, the one who needs to fully exhaust the options before arriving at the option she noticed first. You know her well. There is no impatience in you toward her, not exactly. What there is a kind of automatic recalibration, the way a musician adjusts tempo to the conductor without stopping playing. You slow. You become the particular version of yourself that has all the time in the world, because this customer needs you to have all the time in the world, and if you don't appear to have it, she becomes anxious, and an anxious customer is a customer who leaves without buying anything. She buys 1.5 yards of the dark green and 1 1/4 of the sage green, because in the end she can't quite let the sage go. This is the correct outcome. This is what attentiveness to the second customer produces. The third, a young woman, perhaps your age, perhaps a little older, who comes to the counter and asks the price of the velvet ribbon and then stands looking at it for a long time without saying anything. not deciding, something else. Something in the quality of her looking that tells you she's not going to buy anything today. That she has perhaps come to look because the looking is something. The being in this room among these things is something. And the buying is a separate question that she hasn't solved yet. She has a worn coat. Good quality once, but worn beyond the point where the collar lies flat. She's managing it. Her posture, her expression, the careful pleasantness of her manner, but the coat is telling a different story. You have learned to read coats. The velvet ribbon is 1 6 a yard, you say, and then, because you have by now 8 months of experience to draw on and a read of the situation that Miss Hartley would probably not endorse, we have offcuts from the bolt ends, not always, but sometimes. They're sold at reduced price at the end of Saturday, if you wanted to come back at 6:45. The young woman looks at you. The supervisor sets the price, you say, but it's usually well under the yard rate, sometimes substantially. You're not supposed to say this. It isn't against any specific rule, because no specific rule anticipated someone saying it, but it is the kind of thing that exists in a grey area between helpful and irregular. Thank you, she says, very quietly. She goes. You return to the middle distance. Miss Hartley's Saturday inspection is at 8:40, because on Saturdays the schedule shifts forward by 20 minutes to accommodate the earlier floor traffic, and because Miss Hartley's entire existence appears to be calibrated to the store's schedule with a precision that makes you wonder, sometimes, what she does on Sundays. Whether she inspects her own rooms, whether there is a small notebook in which she records observations about the quality of her private time. She arrives at your counter, you stand straight. She examines the display. She looks at the ledger. She runs a brief eye over the counter surface, and then picks up the scissors and tests the hinge and replaces them on the glass. And this time they land in exactly the position you placed them, which you count as a minor victory. Your sales yesterday, she says, not as a question. You recite them. 23 transactions, specific totals. She listens the way she always listens, with the quality of someone who already knows the numbers and is checking your knowledge of them against the reality. The number 6 velvet, she says. 3 yards sold. You have 9 yards remaining. Yes, Miss Hartley. The customer who bought the dark green and the sage green. Was the sage purchase suggested or self-determined? This is the question you weren't expecting. She expressed uncertainty about the dark green, you say carefully. I showed both options. She came to the sage independently. A sound that is not approval and is not disapproval, but occupies the territory between them. A well-managed second sale. Note it in your personal ledger. She moves on. You stand very still for a moment. Miss Hartley has, in 8 months, commented positively on one of your decisions exactly 3 times. This is the 3rd. You make the note. By 11 o'clock on Saturday, the 2nd floor is operating at its full Saturday intensity. To describe what this actually is, you need to understand what it means when I say the floor is full. Not full the way a room is full when you can barely move. Full the way a market is full. A continuous movement, a constant sound, every counter attended, every case being pointed at by someone, the particular noise that 22 women making 22 separate transactions simultaneously produces, which is a kind of sustained soft roar, the roar of commerce conducted in near whispers. The smell on a full Saturday is intense, not unpleasant, or not entirely. It is complex in the way that any smell produced by 100 bodies in a shared space is complex, but the specifics are interesting. There is in the morning the particular perfume of women who have dressed carefully for this excursion, who have applied scent and powder with deliberate hands, who are wearing their going-out clothes, and the effect is of a kind of floral overlay on the room's base note of fabric and varnish. By midday this overlay has warmed and changed. Perfume evolves differently on warm skin than on cool, and a busy Saturday morning does warm the skin. And by afternoon the smell of the floor has a thickness, a richness. That is part of why the plate glass windows are regularly cracked in the afternoon to admit some October air, which arrives grey and coal-scented from Oxford Street, and is, by comparison, a relief. You sell ribbon. You sell it all morning without stopping except for the brief pauses between customers when you restock and reorder and make the small adjustments to the display that continuous handling by Saturday morning customers requires. The velvet ribbon sold 3 more yards by 11:30, which means the display is looking thin and you need to bring forward the backup bolt from the lower shelf, which requires kneeling, which is a thing your left knee handles differently from your right knee now, and which produces a small sound of protest from the ankle as you transfer weight. You get up. You continue. The lunch break on Saturday is at a different time. Saturday lunch rotates. Some Saturdays you go at 1, some Saturdays at 1:30, some Saturdays at 2, which is the late lunch, the one that comes after the worst of the afternoon rush has started, the one where by the time you sit down in the refectory your body has graduated past the second phase of pain and into the third without your permission. This Saturday you are on the 2 o'clock rotation. The morning, therefore, stretches from 8 to 2 without a break. That counts as a break. There are the 30 seconds between customers, the 2 minutes while a customer takes fabric to the window, the brief window while you restock. But these are the pauses of a machine that is cooling briefly between operations. They are not rest. By 1 o'clock your left ankle has something to say that it wasn't saying at 10. By 1:30, it is saying it more firmly. You listen to it the way you've learned to listen to it, with attention but not with engagement, the way you'd listen to a sound from a building you live in that you can't do anything about. You take note. You continue. At 2 o'clock exactly, Clara comes to cover your counter. Clara is 19 and has been here 6 months and takes the covering very seriously, studying the counter in a way that you remember studying your own counter in your first weeks, with the focused anxiety of someone who knows an inspection might happen and wants to be ready. It's quiet just now, you tell her. The velvet is low. I've pulled the backup bolt, but if it runs out before I'm back, the reserve is on the 3rd shelf left side. The grosgrain is running well. Miss Hartley was in at 8:40, and she'll do another pass at 3. Clara nods. She's writing this down on a small card she carries in her apron pocket. A practice you have graduated past, but which you remember the precise comfort of. Having the information on the card, having the card in the pocket, having the pocket as a form of external memory. You'll be fine, you say, and you go downstairs. The refectory at 2 o'clock on a Saturday has a different energy from the midday crowd. The women at the 2 o'clock sitting have been on the floor for 6 hours. The particular edge that comes with 6 hours of continuous standing is visible in the way they move, the way they sit. Not the afternoon slump of comfortable fatigue, but something more specific, a precise physical accounting of what has been spent and what remains. Ruth is already there. She has been on the early lunch rotation and has returned with a cup of tea that she's holding in both hands, which means she's warming her hands rather than simply drinking. which means her hands have been cold, which means the glove case has been opened and closed enough times this morning that the brief gusts of cool air from the upper shelves have made themselves felt. Ruth's hands are always colder than yours. She says this has been true since childhood, some constitutional difference that keeps her extremities less warm than they ought to be. The glove counter is, she says, the wrong counter for her in winter. The haberdashery is better, a closed case with its own small warmth. But you don't choose your counter is assigned. How's the floor, you ask? The green-coat woman came back, Ruth says. You look at her. Not to cause trouble, Ruth says. Just came back, bought some gloves, didn't say anything. You eat your bread. Normal customer, Ruth says, as if nothing happened. There is a silence in which both of you process this. That's how it works, Maisie says from further down the table without looking up from her soup. Maisie is perpetually 3 steps ahead in the understanding of how things work. She doesn't think about it. Why would she? It's done. Edith is done too, Eleanor says quietly. Yes, Maisie says. A pause. That's how it works, Maisie says again, not cruelly, just as a statement of the mechanism. You eat your soup. The soup today has meat in it. Lamb, probably, or what claims to be lamb. In the refectory, the gap between claim and reality is not always precisely negotiated, with root vegetables that have softened into the broth and given it a body that the purely vegetable soups don't have. It is good. It is genuinely good, the way some of the refectory meals are genuinely good, which is one of the things that makes the living-in system tolerable. Not just the bed and the roof, but the meals that are sometimes real comfort, that carry in them the particular warmth of something that was prepared by someone who knows what cold feet feel like. You eat all of it. You eat the bread as well, every piece, because this is the last food before the evening meal at 7:30, and the afternoon still has 5 hours in it, and 5 hours on a Saturday floor is not something to undertake underfueled. 14 minutes. You drink your tea standing because there isn't time to finish it sitting. Back up the 21 steps. The afternoon is harder than the morning in ways that don't follow from logic. Logically, the afternoon should be easier. You know the day's rhythm. You know the current inventory. You've already warmed into the work. The morning's novelty has been replaced by the afternoon's established routine, but the afternoon is harder. It's harder because your body knows by now what the afternoon means. It knows there are still 4 hours of standing between you and supper, 4 hours between the present moment and the bench in the dormitory, with your feet against the wall. Your body has made this calculation, and is expressing an opinion about it that your mind is required to override. The overriding takes energy that was there in the morning and is partly spent by the afternoon. And so the afternoon requires something different from the morning, something more deliberately constructed. The morning's performance is relatively easy. You're rested, the show has just begun, the costume still fits well. The afternoon's performance is the harder one, the one that requires the performer to reach for something when the natural supply has run lower, to find the warmth and the attention and the pleasant readiness from a reserve rather than from the immediate well. You find it. Most days you find it. Not from courage exactly, not from any admirable quality, mostly from habit. The habit of finding it has been built over 8 months until it's as automatic as the ribbon fold, as reflexive as stepping to the right to let a customer pass. The performance has become partly genuine, which is one of the more complicated things about this work. The blurring of what you're doing deliberately and what you've simply become. At 3:15, a woman comes to the counter who changes the texture of the afternoon. She's perhaps 60, dressed with the kind of precision that signals money not recently acquired but long held, the particular understated quality of women whose families have been wealthy for generations and therefore have nothing to prove. No flash, just quality. The very good shoes, the cashmere gloves, the coat that fits so well it looks as though it grew on her. She looks at the display. She doesn't say anything for a long moment. You wait. You have learned to wait. "I would like to see," she says finally, "the full range of your velvet ribbon." "Of course," you say. The full range of the velvet ribbon is 37 varieties. You know this because you counted them last Monday. 37 different combinations of width and colour and finish. Flat velvet, crushed velvet, silk velvet with a different hand from cotton velvet, velvet with a wire edge for millinery purposes, velvet so narrow it is almost thread, velvet so wide it borders on trim. You begin to lay them out. This is a proper showing. Not the 3 or 4 options you'd pull for a straightforward request, but the systematic presentation of a full range to a customer who wants to see everything before deciding, or who wants to understand what exists. You work from the narrow widths to the wide, grouping by colour within width categories, keeping each bolt unrolled just enough to show the quality without wrinkling. She watches you work. Not passive watching, attentive watching, the eyes of someone who's assessing not just the ribbons but the hand that is presenting them. This is one of the things you notice about certain customers. They're evaluating the salesgirl as much as the goods. They want to see whether you know what you're handling, whether the knowledge is real. "The silk velvet," she says when you reach the mid-range widths. "Which of these is the better hand?" You pick up 2 bolts, hold a length of each between thumb and forefinger, feel the weight and the fall and the particular give of each. "This one," you say, offering the darker of the 2. "The pile is denser, the backing is lighter, it'll drape better than the other. This one. The second is firmer, better for shape holding. If it's for millinery, the second. If it's for trimming or sash, the first." She takes the darker one from you and feels it herself. Her cashmere-gloved fingers move along the face of the ribbon with a deliberateness that tells you she is someone who has been touching quality fabric long enough to have developed an opinion about what quality means. "Where is this from?" she asks. "France, the Lyon workshops. The 2-inch velvet." You indicate the width she's holding, and the wider widths come from the same supplier. "How long have you carried this supplier?" "I believe several years," you say, "though I've only been here 8 months." She looks at you directly for the first time. "8 months," she says. Not dismissively, more like she's placing a measurement. "Yes, ma'am." She continues to examine the ribbon. For 10 minutes she moves through the full range you've laid out. She handles perhaps 12 of the 37. She asks specific questions. The composition of the wire in the wire-edged variety, whether the particular red you have comes in a narrower width, the colour-fast reliability of the dark navy she finds she might need. You answer each one accurately, and where you don't know with certainty, say so, and tell her what you do know. "You've earned a good knowledge of this stock," she says at the end. It is not a compliment in the way most compliments are shaped. It is an assessment, delivered neutrally, the way you'd assess the quality of a ribbon. The pile is dense, the knowledge is good. Observed fact. "Thank you, ma'am," you say. "I'll take 4 yards of the dark lion silk, the 2-inch width, and 2 yards of the wire edge in this," she indicates the burgundy. and 3 of the narrow black, the cotton, not the silk. The silk stretches in application, and I don't want stretch. You cut and fold and wrap with the care the transaction has established as its standard. The total is 9 shillings and 4 pence. She pays without comment. She's the kind of customer who pays without comment because the amount is the amount and is either right or wrong, and if it's right, discussion is unnecessary. One more thing, she says, taking her parcel. Of course. The girl who was dismissed yesterday, Edith, I believe her name was. You're very still. I was in the store yesterday afternoon. A pause. I was watching from the hosiery side. I saw what happened. You say nothing. If you know where she's gone, the woman says, or when she plans to find a new position. Tell her she may contact Mrs. Alderton at 37 Grosvenor Square. I run a small dressmaking enterprise, not retail, private clients. I value people who know how to handle fabric properly. There would be a reasonable wage and no dormitory system. She says the last 3 words as she says most things, as a neutral fact, but the weight in them is not neutral. I'll pass it along, you say. Good. She takes her parcel. You'll make a good floor supervisor in 3 years, if they're wise enough to promote from within rather than appointing another man who's never cut a yard of anything in his life, she goes. You stand behind your counter. 3 things have just happened simultaneously. You were seen. Someone with the kind of authority that comes from 37 Grosvenor Square saw the thing on this floor yesterday and formed an opinion about it that is different from Miss Hartley's or Mr. Pierce's, and Edith, wherever she is tonight, has a door somewhere. You make a note of the address on the back of your personal stock card where no one but you will see it. The floor closes at 7, 1 hour later than Friday. The last customers are ushered out with the same polite persistence as every other evening, but there is more resistance on Saturday. Saturday customers stay longer, circle longer, are harder to move toward. The exit because they've come specifically for the Saturday experience, and the Saturday experience doesn't have an obvious endpoint in the way that a specific errand does. By 7:20 the cloths are on. Your feet are doing something at this point that is less like pain and more like a systemic statement. A full-body exhaustion centred in the lower half, the legs and back and the bones of the foot that have been managing things since 8 this morning. 11 hours, give or take. You do the closing procedure, then you go upstairs. In the dormitory, after supper, the conversation turns to Edith. Not for the first time since yesterday, but tonight it's different because you have information. You tell Maisie about Mrs. Alderton, Grosvenor Square, the private dressmaking, the message. Maisie is quiet for a moment. Does she know? Maisie asks. Meaning, does Edith know you're going to pass it on? I said I'd pass it along. She's at her sister's, in Paddington. Eleanor has the address. Eleanor does have the address, written in the small notebook she keeps in her apron pocket. The same notebook where she records the things she needs to remember in a world where remembering is sometimes the only tool she has. I'll write to her tomorrow, you say. Sunday morning. And that is that. Not a solution. A door. A possibility. Something that Mrs. Alderton noticed and chose to do something about, which is the smallest act and the most important one. The act of noticing and then doing something with what you've seen. You write the letter on Sunday morning, sitting in the small dormitory sitting room with the lamp on and the rain on the window and London doing its Sunday business outside. You write it to Edith, whose full name you've realised you don't know, so the letter is addressed Miss Edith, which feels insufficient but will have to do. And you write the name and address of Mrs. Alderton, and you write, "I saw you walk past, and I know what was and was not in your pocket, and I hope this is useful." You seal it. You walk 2 streets to the Paddington address Eleanor gave you and put the letter through the door. Then you walk back. Sunday afternoon opens the way Sunday afternoons do, with the particular quality of free time that has been deferred all week and now arrives all at once, slightly overwhelming in its lack of structure. You have from 1 o'clock to the 9 o'clock bell, 8 hours. The laundry needs doing. The collar is soaking but needs to be boiled and pressed. Your left boot has developed a separation at the toe seam that needs attention. Not cobbling, not yet, but the kind of preventive maintenance with a needle and coarse thread that can buy you another month before the cobbler becomes unavoidable. But after the laundry, after the boot, you go outside. Oxford Street on a Sunday in October 1912 is a different thing from Oxford Street on a Tuesday. The shops are closed, or most of them. Some of the smaller establishments manage a half-open Sunday trade through what might politely be described as selective interpretation of the relevant regulations. But the major stores are shut, and the major stores are what give Oxford Street its weekday identity. So without them, the street feels both emptier and more itself, if that makes sense. More like a street, and less like an institution. The pavements are busy. Sunday walking is a London tradition of a specific kind. Not walking to a destination, not walking as transportation, but walking as activity. The Sunday afternoon promenade of the city's middling population, dressed somewhat better than usual, moving through the streets with the particular gait of people who are moving because moving is the point. Families, couples, women in groups of 2 and 3, linked at the elbows. You walk south. The route takes you through the back streets between Oxford Street and Regent Street, the narrower streets where the service entrances of the big establishments face each other across cobblestones, still dark from last night's rain. You know these streets the way you know the dormitory stairs, by the number of steps, the particular feel underfoot, the way the buildings on either side lean slightly toward each other in the upper stories, then south through the quieter end of Regent Street and down into the park. Green Park. You come to Green Park most Sundays when the weather permits. It is 20 minutes from Hartley's at a purposeful pace, and it is the largest open space within easy reach, and it has the quality that open spaces have, which is increasingly necessary to you after a week of counters and dormitory rooms and the covered walkway, and the refectory and the stairs, the quality of distance, of having a horizon that is further away than 15 feet. In October, the park is stripped down. The elaborate summer planting is over. What remains is the grass and the trees and the paths, and the trees have turned. The elms along the south path are deep gold, the particular warm gold that elm leaves go in October before they fall, and the light through them on a grey day has a quality you can't explain but that affects you physically, a warmth that is independent of the temperature, which is cold, your breath making small clouds as you walk. You sit on a bench, your feet are better today. Sunday is the day they get the most recovery time. Last night's sleep, this morning's relative rest. And now the walk, which is its own kind of different from standing. The motion actually helping the circulation in a way that standing does not. They are still not normal. They may never be entirely normal in the way they were before Hartley's, but they are better than Saturday night. You sit. The park is full in the way a park on a Sunday afternoon is full. Loosely, comfortably. with the generousness of space that no floor at Hartley's ever achieves. People are spread out rather than packed. Children run without colliding with display cases. A couple argues quietly by the bandstand, their voices barely reaching you, and then not reaching you as they move away. You watch the elm trees. You think about Edith's letter, whether she'll receive it today, whether she'll read it and feel the door open, or whether she'll read it and find the door is the wrong size, doesn't fit her situation. That private dressmaking in Grosvenor Square is not the thing she wants or needs, or can reach from wherever she is right now. You think about the Tuesday before last when a small boy came to your counter with fourpence in his fist and asked with enormous seriousness whether fourpence was enough for ribbon for his mother's birthday. The smallest piece of the narrowest satin was threepence halfpenny, and you found it in the offcuts and wrapped it with the same tissue and string as a full transaction, and told him it was exactly fourpence, and watched him leave with the parcel held in both hands with the care of something valuable, which it was. This is also part of the work. Not the part that appears in any description of the position, not on the card that outlines the responsibilities of a counter-assistant second floor. But it is part of what the day is made of. These small moments that have no commercial value and no place in the ledger, and which are, in their way, the realest things. You think about Thursday. Thursday comes in the middle of a week that is unremarkable in the way that most of the weeks are unremarkable, which is to say is fully occupied and physically demanding and full of transactions and inspections, and the morning cold water and the evening soup, and nothing in it stands apart from the general texture of life at Hartley's except that at the far end of it Thursday evening there is the meeting. You've told Ruth. Ruth said she'd come. You haven't told Maisie. This is a deliberate choice. Maisie's caution is valid and you respect it, and you are not going to ask her to compromise it by knowing something she'd feel obligated to weigh against her own judgment. What Maisie doesn't know, she doesn't have to decide about. Thursday proceeds normally until 6 o'clock. Closing procedure, counter covered, scissors in position, ledger closed and balanced, ribbon count verified to the nearest half yard, then supper. Supper is leek, soup and bread and the tea that is always reliable. You eat quickly. Ruth eats quickly. You make no particular production of leaving, and you avoid meeting Eleanor's eye, because Eleanor has the face of someone who would immediately communicate whatever she saw in yours to anyone who looked, and you need nobody looking. Down through the covered walkway, down the staff staircase, out the back door. The alley smells of wet brick and kitchen waste. You turn left. The church hall is on a street behind Selfridge's, which is interesting geographically. Selfridge's, which opened 3 years ago with the radical proposition that shopping should be open and exploratory rather than closed and transactional, that the customer should be allowed to touch and browse without buying, that the store itself should be entertainment. Harry Gordon Selfridge is an American, which explains some of this. The English retail establishment has not been entirely sure what to make of him, though the queues at his opening suggested the public had made up their minds. You've been inside Selfridge's twice. It is very beautiful. The light is better than Hartley's, and the layout is more open, and there are more plants. The shopgirls there stand at counters for 10-hour days, same as you. The church hall is lit from inside, the warm light visible through the gap in the door from halfway down the street. Inside, rows of chairs, perhaps 60 of them, and perhaps 50 women already seated. More arriving. Women in the black uniforms of department stores, some still wearing their coats, some with their hair still precisely pinned from the inspection. Women from the glove counters and the haberdashery and the fabric and the millinery and probably the lingerie department on the top floor of the store, 2 streets over which you've never worked because Hartley's doesn't have a lingerie department and you're not sure how to feel about this. There is a woman at the front. She is perhaps 35, wearing a coat that is neither particularly good nor particularly poor. The coat of someone who is making other calculations. She has notes on a piece of paper, but she doesn't look at them often. She has the quality of someone who has said this before, and will say it again, and is not performing the saying but simply doing it, which is different. You sit. Ruth sits beside you. The woman at the front begins. She talks about the standing. She talks about it in terms that you've never heard anyone use, specifically the medical terms. Varicose veins, the clinical word for what Maisie showed you on her calves, the branching dark lines, the map to somewhere you don't want to go. Edema, the swelling in the left ankle that you've been managing for 6 months. The orthopaedic evidence gathered by a doctor named Dr. Murray, who's been researching the specific conditions of shop workers since 1908, about the changes in foot architecture that occur in women who stand for more than 8 hours a day on hard floors for more than 3 years. She says, these are not individual problems. These are occupational injuries, and they are preventable. She says, the 1911 Shops Act requires seating provision. And then she says very quietly that the requirement without enforcement is not a requirement. It is a suggestion. And no one in this room has been sitting when the floor is quiet, and everyone in this room knows why. And the reason is that the supervisors do not enforce the act, and the managers do not require the supervisors to enforce the act, and the managers are not required to enforce it by anyone who will actually appear in the store and check. She says, there are 200 women employed within a quarter mile of this building. If 200 women sit down simultaneously every time the floor is quiet, for the duration permitted under the Act, what happens? What happens is the question hangs in the room for a moment. Someone at the back says, we get fined. The woman at the front says, possibly. What else happens? Silence. Then Ruth beside you says, very quietly, not loudly, not performing it, 200 women sit down. The woman at the front looks at Ruth. Yes, she says, 200 women sit down, and the fines accumulate, and then someone has to decide whether to prosecute 200 women simultaneously, which costs time and money and generates a kind of publicity that the stores on this street are not certain they want. She does not say this as an inspiring speech. She says it as an accounting problem, a question of numbers and leverage, which is perhaps why you believe it. She talks about the fines system. She has figures. A woman who has been collecting data for 18 months from women at various stores along Oxford Street, who has compiled the average deduction from wages via the fines mechanism. The number is 1 shilling and 4 pence per week, average, across the stores surveyed. 1 shilling and 4 pence per week per worker, across 200 workers, per week. She writes the number on the board. You look at the number. 1 shilling and 4 pence per week is the price of your soap and hairpins, the collar that must be replaced every month and a half, the small supplementary things that stand between adequate and actually managing. 1 shilling and 4 pence per week is the amount the fine system extracts from the average shop girl on Oxford Street in order to maintain the standards that the stores advertise as part of their distinguished service. the impeccable presentation of their staff, the white collar and the correctly placed scissors, and the half-yard discrepancy in a grosgrain ledger. The cost of impeccable presentation is borne by the impeccably presented. The woman at the front is still talking. She's talking now about what next means, which is more complicated than what's wrong, because what's wrong is clear, has been clear in various forms for long enough that parliamentary committees have sat in 1908 and 1910 and produced reports that sit in government offices and are very well written and have changed very little. And what next is the harder question, the one that requires the specific courage that isn't dramatic or theatrical, but is harder in its way than drama, the courage of doing the unremarkable thing over and over and over until it adds up to something. She says, write down what happens to you. Write it exactly. Date, time, event. Keep it. Share it when asked. Be a record. She says, use the seat. When the floor is quiet and you're within your rights, use the seat. Every time. Document when you're told not to. She says, come back next Thursday. You think about Miss Hartley's notebook. You think about adding your own notebook to the conversation. You leave the hall at 8:30. The street is dark and cold. You can see your breath. You can hear from somewhere further along the street music from a public house, something lively played on what sounds like a piano. That is not quite in tune, but is being played with enough energy that the tuning is almost irrelevant. You walk back. Ruth is quiet beside you, which is unusual for Ruth, who normally fills silences with the easy conversational warmth that is simply her nature. The silence has a thoughtful quality. She is processing. The seat, she says eventually. Yes. The glove counter has a seat. Yes. Mrs. Hartley, she means Miss Hartley, a slip that you've noticed Ruth makes occasionally, has never once told me I could use it? No, you agree. She's never told me I couldn't either. She's just never mentioned it. No. Ruth is quiet again. Monday, she says. Monday, you confirm. It is not a plan. Not yet. It is direction. But direction, right now, in the cold October air outside a church hall on a street behind Selfridges, with your feet aching in their specific way, and 50 other women walking home from the same room in various directions through the dark. Direction is enough. Monday morning, 6 o'clock. The bell, the cold, the brick wall through the window. You wash your face, pin your collar, do the bootlaces, go down the 17 steps. The morning procedure, the cloths, the display, the scissors on the glass exactly placed. Miss Hartley at 8:40, the notebook, the ledger, your back straight. She finishes her inspection of your counter and turns to go. You say, Miss Hartley. She stops. I understand the Act provides for seating when the floor is quiet, you say. Your voice is level, professional. The same voice you use with customers who are certain about an incorrect thing. I wanted to confirm whether the seat at the gloves counter is available for general use when not in use. Miss Hartley is still. The silence has a particular quality. You're standing behind your counter with your back straight and your hands folded on the counter's edge and your face carrying the expression of pleasant capability, and you're asking a question that both of you know is not really a question. She looks at you for 5 full seconds. The seating provision, she says, is as required by the Act. Of course, you say. I appreciate the clarification. She moves on. That is all. No note in the notebook, or not as note you can see. No comment further. Just, the seating provision is as required by the Act, which means yes. which means the seat exists and you may use it and the Act says so. And Miss Hartley, whatever her private opinion, has said so out loud in your presence and yours, and if she retracts it later, the retraction will have been heard. You stand behind your counter. The morning is quiet. There are no customers yet. You're standing. But something is different. November arrives. The temperature drops with the decisiveness that London reserves for the transition from late October to early November. A decisive step down from the brisk cool of autumn into the established grey chill of winter. The kind of cold that settles in the bones of stone buildings and doesn't leave until April. The dormitory room is colder. The covered walkway between the dormitory and the main building is much colder. In the mornings, the window along the walkway is sometimes frosted on the inside. The breath of the building itself apparently insufficient to warm the glass. The floor of Hartley's is heated by registers in the floor through which warm air rises from somewhere in the basement, from pipes connected to the boiler that also heats the water for the washing facilities and the laundry. This system works reasonably well in the centre of the floor and less well near the exterior walls, where the plate glass windows, for all their impressive size, conduct the November cold inward with an enthusiasm the boiler cannot quite counter. The ribbon counter is near the exterior wall. This is information you have been managing since September. In summer it was an advantage. The ribbon counter received a good deal of natural light. In winter, it is the opposite. The particular chill that comes off the plate glass when the temperature outside drops below 8 degrees is something your left side has learned to anticipate, and your right side is slightly sheltered from by the angle of the wall. You wear an extra vest under the uniform. This is technically not in the regulations. The regulations specify the uniform and do not mention foundation layers, which is either an oversight or a deliberate silence, and you're proceeding on the assumption that the deliberate silence is a form of permission. Maisie has been wearing an extra vest since October. Miss Hartley has, to your knowledge, made no mention of it. The winter brings new rhythms. The store's window displays change monthly. This is handled by a team from the display department who come in on Sunday evenings and rearrange the mannequins and replace the props, and who have, as far as you can tell, a thorough and well-developed artistic vision that they execute with total indifference to anyone who might want to use the window areas for any other purpose during the installation. The Monday morning after a window change has a particular quality, the slightly recalibrated quality of familiar surroundings rearranged, the same room but with different furniture, requiring a brief update to the internal map. In December, the windows become spectacular. This is something you weren't prepared for in your first December, though you're now approaching the second. The display department's December operation is a different scale from the rest of the year. The plate glass windows fill with scenes, a winter garden, a festive table, a drawing-room scene with stuffed fabric children and wrapped parcels and artificial snow, all of it lit by the electric lights from within in a way that makes the scene glow against the dark street. The customers change too. December customers are operating under a different emotional register than October customers. There is urgency, generally, a kind of forward-pitched energy that mixes pleasure and anxiety, the pleasure of the thing and the anxiety of the time running out, the pressure of the gift unchosen, the ribbon still uncut, the parcel not yet assembled. This energy makes the floor more intense, but also strangely more alive, more charged. There is something in being in the middle of people who are buying things for each other, for children, for people they love, Even the most exasperating customer in December has a reason behind the exasperation that is warmer than anything. You sell a great deal of ribbon in December. The velvet ribbon nearly runs out on a Tuesday afternoon and has to be restocked from reserve, which requires a note to the buying department, which you write in the appropriate form and deliver to the appropriate office, and which results in the reserve being replenished by Thursday, which is a small logistics victory that nobody notices except you and Miss Hartley, who notices it in the form of not commenting on a ribbon shortage during inspection. Success at Hartley's is mostly the absence of comment. It is Thursday evening in December, the meeting. You've been going to the meetings every Thursday for 6 weeks. You've taken up the seat at the gloves counter twice, both times when the floor was quiet and your standing was genuinely not required by any customer interaction. And both times you sat for the 4 minutes and 17 seconds and 31 seconds respectively, that the quiet lasted before someone arrived, and then you stood and nobody said anything, and Ruth, at the gloves counter, looked at you across the floor with an expression of something that might have been solidarity, or might have been simple acknowledgement, and you looked back, and then you both looked at your respective counters. Twice. It is not a revolution. It is 4 minutes and 17 seconds and then 31 seconds of being in a chair. But it is real. It happened. It is in your personal notebook with the dates and times and the circumstances. And if anyone ever asks you whether the provision was available and whether it was used, the answer is yes, with documentation. The meeting tonight is about Christmas, specifically about the fact that December is the most profitable month in the retail calendar, and therefore the month in which the pressure on the floor staff is highest, and that the hours, already 10 per day plus the extra hour on Saturdays, have a tendency, in the weeks immediately before Christmas, to stretch without formal notification. The floor opening early, the floor closing late, not by much, 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there, but 20 minutes here and 30 minutes there across 6 weeks is many hours that belong to the store that the store has not purchased. The woman at the front, her name is Clara Brennan, you know this now. She works at the Army and Navy store 4 streets over. She has been doing this for 3 years. Says, start keeping time. Not just the standing, the time. In, out, the discrepancy. You have a small notebook. You have been keeping time for 4 weeks. You open it and read out the accumulated discrepancies for the group. October, 17 minutes extra spread across 4 days. November, 43 minutes extra spread across 6 days. Others read out similar numbers, some larger. Someone from a store further along the street has 2 hours and 14 minutes of undocumented overtime in November alone. Clara Brennan writes the numbers on the board. The numbers are not dramatic. They are modest numbers as these things go. But numbers have a quality that experience doesn't have, which is that they accumulate. 43 minutes from one woman, times 50 women, times November, times 12 months, is a number that starts to suggest a policy rather than a coincidence. This, Clara Brennan says, is the beginning. She doesn't say of what. She doesn't need to. Christmas Eve falls on a Tuesday in 1912. The store is open until 8 o'clock. This has been formally announced 2 weeks in advance, which is different from the informal late closings of the previous weeks. 8 o'clock, formally, in the schedule, and you are on the floor from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening, with the standard lunch break, which is 30 minutes, which you take at 2 because you're on the late lunch rotation, and on Christmas Eve there is no possibility of a schedule adjustment because the floor is impossible and everyone is needed. 12 hours, that is today. You know this before you get up. It has been in the schedule for 2 weeks. You have been counting toward it and away from it simultaneously, the way you count toward things you can't change, acknowledging the approach without making yourself more conscious of it than necessary. The morning bell is the same bell. The cold is the same cold. The 17 steps down. The covered walkway. The 21 steps down. The morning procedure. Miss Hartley at 8:40, slightly later than usual because the floor is already busy when she arrives. The Christmas Eve customers having materialised at the precise moment the doors opened with the concentrated purposefulness of people who have left things to the last day, and have, depending on their temperament, made peace with this or not. Your counter is the busiest it has been since you arrived. Ribbon for packages, ribbon for wreaths, ribbon for the decorations that women have been constructing at home all week and need one more element of the element that will make the thing finished. Ribbon for hair, ribbon for the specific purpose that they know, but you, cut into length, don't need to. 3 yards, 2, 1.5, cut, fold, wrap, count, smile, next. You're steady. This is the word for what you are. Not fast exactly, though you are fast. The 8 months have made you fast in the same way they've made you know the stock, as a function of repetition developing into fluency. Not cheerful exactly, though the service smile is deployed with the consistency it always is. Steady. The steadiness of something that has been tested enough to know its own capacity, that is working at that capacity without exceeding it, that has found the pace of the day and settled into it. The floor, on Christmas Eve, has a particular quality that is different from any other day. Even the harried customers, the ones who are late and stressed, and have perhaps not treated the woman behind the counter with the consideration that would be nice, even they carry something underneath the stress, something that is about the things Christmas Eve is actually about, which is not ribbon, and not grosgrain, and not the precise angle of the scissors on the glass counter, but the people they're buying for, the children and the parents and the husbands and the sisters, the accumulated relationships that the ribbon and the grosgrain are merely the wrapping of. You cut a length of red velvet for a man who has clearly never purchased ribbon in his life, who holds the suggested length between his hands as if trying to determine its nature, who says, "Is that enough for a hat box?" and who you reassure is that yes, that is enough, and who thanks you with a relief that is about more than ribbon. You cut a length of narrow white satin for an old woman who's been buying this specific ribbon from this specific counter every Christmas Eve for many years. You don't know this, but Maisie told you about her, the woman who always comes on Christmas Eve for the narrow white satin, and who takes it with the precision of a collector completing a set. You cut many lengths, all afternoon. At 6 o'clock your feet are telling you something direct and specific. At 6:30 they are being very clear. At 7 they have moved past argument into a kind of resigned factual statement about the architecture of the human foot and what it was and was not designed to do, and you are listening to this statement with the attention it deserves and continuing anyway. At 8 o'clock Miss Hartley walks the floor one final time and nods. Just once, barely a movement, but you see it. And you begin the closing procedure. Christmas Day is Tuesday. The store is closed. You sleep until 9, not the planned sleeping of someone who has decided to sleep late. the involuntary sleeping of someone whose body has made the decision unilaterally, and who surfaces at 9 with no memory of having been asleep since the evening before, and no particular sense of being fully rested, but an absence of the imminent bell feeling that governs every other morning. The dormitory is quieter than usual. Maisie has gone home to her family in Clapham. Constance has gone somewhere she didn't explain, with a bag packed and a look of purposeful privacy. It is you and Ruth and Eleanor in the room, and all three of you sleep late and then move through the morning slowly, in the particular atmosphere that closed buildings have on days when they are closed, a different quality of sound from the walls, a different texture of light through the window. The refectory serves Christmas dinner. This is one of the genuine gifts that the living-in system, for all its considerable disadvantages, provides. Mrs. Bridge in the basement has overseen a Christmas dinner that is real. A roast, properly done, with potatoes that are crisp rather than soft, with vegetables that have not entirely surrendered their identity, with gravy and bread, and at the end a pudding that has been steamed and presented with what appears to be genuine pride. You eat it, every part of it. Ruth cries a little, not dramatically, just some tears at the edges of her eyes during the pudding, which she addresses by the simple expedient of eating more pudding. Missing home? Eleanor asks. A bit, Ruth says. My mother does a good pudding. This is good, you say. It is, Ruth admits. It's good. You eat your pudding. Outside, London is doing Christmas in the particular way that a city this size does Christmas. Thousands of private celebrations happening simultaneously in apartments and houses and rooms. Thousands of puddings and thousands of people who are a bit or very much glad that it's today and not tomorrow, and the streets outside carrying a quietness that Oxford Street never otherwise has, the particular Sunday quality that holy days have in common with Sundays, the world briefly at a reduced volume. After dinner, you put on your coat and go out. Oxford Street empty on Christmas afternoon. You have to see it. You've been here 8 months. You've walked this street in all its weekday and Saturday configurations, but you've never seen it like this. The shops all shuttered, the brass doors locked, the plate glass windows still carrying their Christmas displays, the winter gardens and the festive scenes and the artificial snow, but addressing an empty street, performing to nobody. You stand in front of Hartley's main entrance, the brass revolving door, the red carpet, the mannequin in the nearest window wearing a green velvet dress and holding an artificial rose. From here, it looks like the place they show in the advertisements. The gleaming, beautiful thing. The institution. You know what it looks like from the inside, from the dormitory side, from the ribbon counter, 2nd floor with your back straight, and your feet in phase 3, and the scissors placed exactly on the glass. Both of these things are true simultaneously. This is something you have been learning this year, that things can be two things simultaneously that don't fit together, that the brass doors can be genuinely beautiful, and the conditions behind them can be genuinely wrong, that Miss Hartley can be rigorous and unjust and occasionally have a point, that the work can be tedious and skilled at the same time, that Hartley's can be a monument and a machine. You stand on the empty pavement. The sky above Oxford Street on Christmas afternoon is doing something specific. The winter grey has a strange quality in the late afternoon, where the low light catches the clouds from below and turns them a particular shade between silver and gold. The kind of sky you never saw in Headcorn, because in Headcorn the horizon is low and the sky is everything, and here the sky is a narrow slice above the buildings, but this specific quality of December light catches it and makes it briefly extraordinary. You stand in front of the locked brass doors and look at the extraordinary sky above the department store. Your feet ache. Your collar is white and pinned. You are Agnes Morrow, shopgirl, 17 going on 18, from Headcorn in Kent, and you've been in this city for 8 months and 11 days, and, you know, the 17 steps and the 21 steps and the 377 ribbons and the precise fold of tissue paper and the difference between lion silk velvet and cotton velvet by feel. You know where Mrs. Alderton lives. You know what Thursday evenings are for. You know that Maisie's caution is valid and that it is not the only valid response. You know that Edith walked past your counter with her hands flat against her sides and her face containing everything, and that 2 words were the smallest true thing you had to offer, and you offered them, and they may have mattered or they may not have mattered, and you're glad you said them either way. You know about the war that is coming the way you know about a storm that hasn't arrived. In the back of the weather sense, the particular pressure in the air that isn't quite a sound and isn't quite a smell, but is both of those things and something else. The intuition that something large is organizing itself somewhere at the edge of the world. You don't know what it will mean. Nobody knows. Not the men at the foreign offices, not the generals drawing plans, certainly not a girl from Headcorn standing outside a department store on Christmas afternoon. But you will be here when it comes, still standing, in the way that you stand. You turn and walk back. The dormitory is warm when you return. Ruth has made tea from the small kettle the sitting room is equipped with, a luxury that exists outside the refectory's jurisdiction and which has become one of the small domestic rituals of the afternoon. The cup is hot in your hands. The sitting room chair is the worn floral one that is nobody's favourite but everyone's default, the one that has absorbed enough of the dormitory's collective weight to have taken on a shape that is approximately what a human body needs. You sit in it. Your feet go up on the footstool. You drink your tea. Eleanor is reading. The small blue book that Frances from the perfume counter always has. It has circulated over the past 2 months through several pairs of hands. It is a pamphlet published by the Women's Industrial Council, and it contains testimony from women who work in the retail trade. Not speeches, not arguments, testimony, what they earn, what they spend, what happens to their bodies over time, what they do when they are dismissed, and why they are dismissed, and what comes after. It is not a comfortable read, but it is a true one, and truth has a particular quality that makes it worth the discomfort. The quality of something that respects you enough to show you what is actually there. Ruth, Eleanor says without looking up. Your feet. Against the wall? Ruth asks. Against the wall, Eleanor confirms. Ruth does it. You do it too. 3 women in the dormitory sitting room on Christmas afternoon, lying on their backs with their feet against the wall, drinking tea, in a city that is the centre of an empire that is 2 years away from the worst thing it has done to itself in modern memory, reading a pamphlet about what the retail trade does to women's feet. Outside, the extraordinary sky has faded back into ordinary grey. London is continuing. Always, London is continuing. January comes. After Christmas and the New Year, which passes in the dormitory with a bottle of something one of the girls from the perfume counter produced from somewhere, and which was passed around the sitting room at midnight, and which tasted of something warm and slightly chemical, and which you drank one careful cup of and felt generous about afterward. After all of this, January. January in a department store is its own particular experience. The January sales. If December is busy, January is different. January is the store turned inside out. The sale begins on the 2nd, and what it means in practice is that the carefully maintained price structure that governs the rest of the year is suspended, replaced by a new structure in which prices have been reduced by varying percentages on varying items, and these reductions are advertised in the newspapers and on placards in the windows. And the result is a customer who arrives not to browse but to acquire, with the specific energy of someone who has calculated what they need and what it should now cost, and who has a timetable. The January sales at Hartley's take approximately everything you learned to do in 8 months and demand you do it faster. The counter management, the stock replenishment, the customer flow, the change giving and the wrapping and the folding and the service smile that has, by January the 3rd, been deployed so many times in so many hours that it has become something operating below the level of deliberate thought, a trained reflex, a smile that fires when a customer arrives the way a door opens when a handle is turned. Your ribbons are discounted 15%. This sounds modest. What it means in practice is that customers who were debating a purchase, who came in October and looked and didn't buy, who came in November and thought about it, they come in January with the calculation already done. The penny difference, the 3 halfpenny difference, the change in the arithmetic that makes the decision possible. They know what they want. The transaction is efficient, fast. Your transaction speed doubles. This is a specific kind of difficult. The difficulty of working at a pace that is sustainable, but leaves no room for the slower customers, the considered transactions, the 12-year-old examining the ceiling while her mother chooses ribbon. In the January sales, the 12-year-old and her ceiling are a luxury the floor cannot afford. You find a version of the work that fits the pace. It is slightly thinner than the version you practice the rest of the year. The warmth is still there, but deployed more efficiently. The service smile is reliable, but faster to arrive and faster to conclude. You are in January a more streamlined version of what you are in October. Maisie says January is what shows you what you're actually made of. She says it in February, when January is over and the normal pace has returned and you're all slightly surprised to find yourselves intact. We're still here, Eleanor says, one February evening in the sitting room. Still here, Ruth agrees. You're writing a letter to your mother. This one is different from the ones you've written before. This one says, I have been here a year. I am different from the person who arrived. Not all of the differences are comfortable, but I think most of them are good. I am learning things they don't teach you in headcorn, and some of them are worth knowing, and some of them are things I'd rather not know but know anyway, which is probably what education is. I am going to be here for a while longer. I am going to be all right. You seal it. Outside, February rain on the window. The brick wall, dark. London, continuing. And now. This is where it always arrives. The story and the hour. The place where the day has been fully spent and the night has taken over, and there is nothing left between you and sleep except the crossing. You are lying in the dormitory room, the ceiling close, the narrow window dark, the breathing of the 4 other women around you in their several rhythms, Constance's deep and even, Ruth's small nestlings, Eleanor's the quiet of someone who has recently learned to trust the night. Maisie is already asleep. She was asleep before you finished your final letter writing, turning away from the light with the efficient finality she brings to everything. The woman who knows that tomorrow comes at 6 and the only reasonable response to this fact is to begin equipping yourself for it. She is right. She is almost always right. Your feet are against the wall for the first 15 minutes. The blood runs back from your ankles, the slow internal undoing of the day's architecture. Then you move them down. The straw mattress receives you. The thin blanket, which is not enough in the deep cold of January, but which is available. And available is what you have. You're warm enough. You're fed enough. You are, in the complicated sense, safe enough. The sounds of the building settle around you. The boiler somewhere in the basement. The low systemic sound of a building managing its own warmth through the January cold. The pipes making their particular communications. The distant street, which even at this hour carries something. A cart. A voice. The sound of a door opening somewhere, and the brief acoustic moment of whatever is inside finding its way out before the door closes again. You think about all the things today put in you. The woman in the good dark coat who knew lion silk velvet by feel and told you about Grosvenor Square and Mrs. Alderton. The half-yard discrepancy in the Grosgrain ledger. The young woman with the worn coat who came to look at velvet and to whom you said something about the offcuts that may have helped or may have simply been heard. The Thursday meeting, the accumulation of minutes in the small notebook, Edith's letter somewhere in Paddington, whether she went to Grosvenor Square, whether she is, tonight, somewhere better or somewhere worse, or somewhere simply different, which is what most changes. The 4 minutes and 17 seconds in the chair. Small things. All small things. In 1912, the people who change things change them with small things repeated until they add up. The document in the notebook. The minutes kept. The seat used when the floor is quiet. Once and then again. The letter written to the woman at the address. The meeting attended, and then attended again, and then again. This is the history that doesn't make it into the official histories, the history that happens in church halls and dormitory sitting rooms and across the distance of a counter in a voice just loud enough to be heard. It is happening now. You are part of it. Sleep is very close. The thoughts are loosening from their daytime weight. Edith and Miss Hartley's notebook, and the narrowing of the grosgrain and the lion silk velvet. These are losing their daylight urgency, settling into the softer texture of things that were real and will be real tomorrow but are right now simply part of the accumulation. 1 year. You have been in this city for 1 year, almost exactly if you count from February to February, which is the honest count. The cardboard case and the letter of introduction and your mother's advice and the 17 steps and the 21 steps and 377 ribbons. You're becoming something. Not what you were in Headcorn. That girl was real, but she was the unformed version. The version before the city got its hands on you. Not quite what you'll be in 2 years, 3 years, whenever the thing that's coming arrives and reshapes everything into something unrecognizable, something in between, something in the process of becoming. This is all right. This is in fact exactly right. You close your eyes. In the years to come, the things that happened in 1912 will seem both very close and very far. The war will come in 1914 and take the men and change the city and change the stores. The counters staffed differently, the stock different, the customers carrying a different weight behind their ordinary purchases. The department stores will adapt because that is what department stores do. They adapt. They have been adapting since they were built. The women in the church hall on Thursday evenings, some of them will be in factories by 1915, which is not the future they planned but is the future the world made for them. and in the factories they will organise with the same patient documentation, the same small notebooks, the same accumulation of minutes and discrepancies until the numbers mean something. Maisie will become a floor supervisor. You don't know this yet, but she will. Eleanor will leave retail entirely, go to work in a post office, marry a man from Bermondsey, and spend her Sunday afternoons for the rest of a long life walking in Green Park, which she will describe to her grandchildren as a habit she developed when she was young and working in the West End. Edith will go to Grosvenor Square. This you will learn eventually, not soon, not in a way that has a neat narrative shape, but eventually in the roundabout way that news travels between women who have shared dormitory rooms and refectory tables and Thursday evenings. She will work for Mrs. Alderton for 3 years and then open her own small dressmaking establishment in Islington, which will still exist in a different form in 20 years, in 30, in 50. But that is all the future, and the future is not tonight. Tonight is the cold ceiling, the brick wall, the breathing of 4 other women. Tonight is the 17 steps you know in your sleep, and the 21 steps you know by feel, and the scissors on the glass exactly placed, and the lion silk velvet that drapes better than the cotton, and the fold of tissue paper that holds its shape. Tonight is the small notebook, and what's in it, and what it will become. Tonight is enough. Let the sounds go quiet now, one by one, the boiler and the pipes, and the distant street, and the particular creak of the building in the cold. Let them fall back. Let the day fall back with them. The counter and the ledger and the inspection and the Thursday evenings and the letter to Paddington and the woman at Grosvenor Square and the satin chair and the minutes documented and the straight back and the service smile and the standing. All the standing. Let it all fall back. You have earned this rest, every minute of it. Let sleep take you the way it takes everyone who has stood for 10 hours and done it again the next day and the next and kept the notebook and said the 2 words and written the letter and come back. Let it take you. Warm enough, fed enough, here enough. Agnes Morrow, ribbon counter, 2nd floor. Still here, still counting. Let the counting stop. Let there be only this, the dark, the warmth, the 5 breathings. London outside doing what London does. Enough, more than enough. Good night.